Hello and welcome. Thank you very much for coming along. Sorry we've started a few minutes late, but welcome to this Development Control Committee. There are no planned fire alarms, so if the fire alarm does sound, it's back out through the main entrance and down the ramp, please. Do we have any apologies for absence?
I do. I have Councillor Fabian Breckles and substitution.
Chris Jackson, Councillor Chris Jackson.
I would say Councillor Chris Jackson. I thought he was substituting for somebody else. All right, okay, thank you so much. And and yeah, because Councillor Paul Goggin was supposed to be here, but other than that, I have no other apologies because I think everyone is here now. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Do we have any declarations of interest for today's agenda? Katia? Oh, could you do it into the mic, please? Otherwise, it won't get picked up.
I have a declaration of interest for Brislington Meadows. I want to recluse myself for that one. And the last one on the item of agenda, I have nothing to do with. So it's in my ward, but I didn't know about it until I saw it on the... I'm not the councillor mentioned on the papers.
Okay, fabulous. Thank you very much. And Andrew?
Yeah, I've declaration of interest in the new Fosseway site. I've got a statement in, so I'll be recusing myself.
Lovely, thank you very much. Okay, so item number 4, minutes of the previous meeting. Is everybody happy with those meetings, or does anybody have any corrections? Yep, good, great. All right, moving swiftly on to the action sheet number 5. Gary?
Thank you, Chair. I don't think there's anything on the action sheet this time around, Chair. All up to date.
Marvellous, what we'd like to see. Okay, any enforcement fun? Oh no, it's appeals next. Sorry, I was too excited.
Thank you, Chair. One update on the appeals. You'll see at the bottom of page 19, item number 12, a site that members of the committee should be familiar with, Land at Home Gardens, Redland Hill. It was subject to a hearing, an appeal hearing on the 15th of November. So we're due to receive the decision on that possibly before Christmas. It'll be of interest to the committee because it's an application that you decided on the 13th of October last year. And obviously, as soon as we get that decision, we'll let you know what the outcome is, and I'll give you a verbal update as soon as we get the decision as well. That's all for me on the appeals this time around, Chair.
Thank you very much. And now enforcement, please.
And on enforcement, pleased to see one notice served since the last time we met relating to a notice served on a large HMO with 8 bedrooms. And so that was issued the 22nd of last month, so it takes effect just before Christmas. It's quite possibly that might be appealed against, but again, if that's the case, we'll keep you informed of that appeal process.
Amazing, thank you very much. Okay, so then we're going to move on to the public forum element of the committee. We're going to start off with a petition, but for anybody who will call up to speak, if you come up to the mic, you have 1 minute to speak. We have a traffic light system that kind of indicates how much time you've got. So it'll start off on green, which is where you've got the full minute. When you get down to half of a minute, it'll go to amber. And then when your minute is up, it will go to red, and I'll start asking you to finish up. And I'm very grateful because we've got a lot on the agenda and a lot of people who wish to speak today. To keep to that minute as best as possible, it would be appreciated. Okay. The first person I'd like to call up to present a petition is Usman Mahmood, please.
Chair, yeah, I've heard that Usman's had a death in the family today, so hasn't been able to come down. Sorry.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm really sorry to hear that. Okay, in which case we'll move on to the first item on the agenda of applications, which is Brislington Meadows. And the first person to call is Councillor Katia Hodgson, please. Approach with care. Sounds like a wild animal. Do you want to give it a little test?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you. Okay.
I could talk about the importance of the ancient hedgerows and the wildlife that use these hedgerows. I could talk about the 14 species of bats that use the meadows and their hunting grounds. I could talk about the lack of connectivity to the public transport infrastructure and how traffic on Broom Road is already high. Adding another 390 cars certainly won't help the traffic. But what I want to focus on in my short space of time and as a politician is representing the residents of Brislington East, the voice of the people and that of the Greater Bristol area. It is true that the council originally in 2011 changed the Meadows designation from a site of nature conservation to a site of housing and pursued a line of planning in a housing crisis. However, our understanding of the huge threat to our climate, the destruction of our fellow creatures, and the catastrophic collapse of biodiversity of the planet has come a long way. I urge the planning inspector to listen to the people of Brislington, to the democratically elected councillors of all the parties, and reserve Brislington Meadows for nature.
Thank you very much. Okay, so then next we have Councillor Tim Rippington, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My statement is too long to be read out, but it's written down on record so everybody can see it. But just to highlight the points on here, we do believe that Brislington Meadows is still an SNCI, and that status has never been rescinded. So the council, we believe, should actually be looking at it from that point of view, rather than not accepting that. That's one of the main points that will be made in the inquiry. But we are pleased that rejection has been recommended from this plan, so that's good. The only other thing I made in my statement is that we think that the transport objection could be much firmer, because although they can't comment on certain things or reserve matters, just putting this number of houses in that area with one road access, we do think is something that could be commented on more firmly at this point in the process. So those are the things that I'd like to...
Thank you very much. Okay. And then finally we have Danica Priest.
I appreciate I'm preaching to the choir here, so I wanted to start by saying thank you. Thank you to the local plan working group, to councillors, planning officers, and the mayor for recognizing that Brislington Meadows is an irreplaceable nature site that needs to be protected from development. It's concerning that a government agency like Homes England can make the claim that this proposal will not only cause zero ecological harm, it will enhance the biodiversity of this long-established grassland. The reality is that 81% of habitat space will be lost and 74% of hedgerows will be removed. Those figures come from their own ecology consultants. This is an unacceptable loss of green space and ancient hedgerow. Mitigation and offsetting should be a last resort for life-saving infrastructure, not common practice for market-rate housing estates. Thanks again for listening to residents and nature organizations like the RSPB, Bristol Tree Forum, and Avon Wildlife Trust. You have the support of the community behind you. Grasslands are rare, and so is having an issue we all agree on. I trust that the planning inspector will see that we have both public opinion and the facts on our side. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll move to the officer report now, please, which is going to be Gary.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to start the officer presentation by setting out sort of the reasons why we're considering the report in this way. It's slightly unusual circumstances, although not unique, as members may recall, dealing with a similar situation with regards to the proposed HMO at Oak Road in Horfield a little while ago. So it's the same situation, but obviously a much bigger scheme and a much higher profile application. So the applicants in this case have appealed against non-determination. Now that is something that any applicant can do once the statutory deadline for making a decision has passed. Normally, an applicant would agree an extension of time with us and work with us through that period to work through the issues on the application. But in this case, you know, exercising their lawful right, the applicants have appealed against non-determination, which means that they take it that the application's had a deemed refusal from the council, and then that puts it in the hands of the a planning inspector appointed by the Secretary of State. So what that means technically is that the council can no longer make the decision on the planning application. That's now in the hands of the planning inspector. The planning inspector appointed by the Secretary of State will start their deliberations and through a public inquiry that's scheduled to start on the 31st of January and is scheduled for a total of 11 days at the moment. But they're not consecutive days, they're over a period of about 5 or 6 weeks, but specific days I believe we've informed the public about. So the reason for the report and the reason why it's on your agenda today is that we need you as a committee to confirm the scope of the council's case at the forthcoming inquiry. And by doing so, we need the committee, guided by the officer report, to assess the current scheme on its planning merits. The report that's before you, and also in the amendment sheet as well, has been reviewed by leading counsel over a period of time recently. And you know, our proposed case through that legal advice is as set out in the report and in the updated putative reasons for refusal in the amendment sheet. So, final thing I just wanted to say to you before I hand over to Richard to talk you through the planning issues on the application is it, given where we're at here with a really high profile public inquiry, that it's important that the council has a very focused and robust case that we can defend at inquiry with appropriate evidence. So I'll hand over to Richard now to go through the issues.
Thank you, Gary. Afternoon, everybody. So up before us now is Brislington Meadows. It's an outline application with some matters reserved. The proposal comprises the development of up to 260 new residential dwellings, together with pedestrian, cycle, vehicle access and car parking, some public open space and associated infrastructure. Approval is sought for access for all other matters reserved. As Gary's explained, it's a bit of a different recommendation today. What we're seeking agreement from members on is the putative reasons for refusing the application at the forthcoming inquiry. So I move to the next slide. So the site is allocated. Loud enough? So the site is allocated in the local plan, meaning the principle of development is accepted. You can see there that the site reference is BSA 1201. It's land at Broom Hill. It's approximately 9.1 hectares and it's in the Brislington East Ward, and the allocation is specifically for housing. Now, as part of this allocation in the local plan, there's a number of development considerations. The two that are considered most applicable to this application, considering the issues on site, are before you, and they relate to the fact that development should be informed by an ecological survey of the site and make provision for mitigation and compensation measures, including enhancement to the grazing land adjacent to Victory Park and compensation for loss of semi-improved neutral grassland and damp grassland. This is all because the site is recognised as having city-wide importance for nature conservation. Similarly, the development considerations require that development should retain or incorporate important trees and hedgerows within the development, and they need to be identified by a tree survey. So moving to the site location plan for this application, you'll see that it includes the site allocation, but then there's some additional pieces of land which are included in the development site because they need to provide access. So here is a pedestrian access linking to School Road. Here's a pedestrian access linking to Victory Park. Here's one to the north leading to Allison Road. And then this piece of land here, this has been included in the allocation because this is going to be the location of the only vehicle access to the site, which comes from Broom Hill Road. If I move to an aerial photograph, you can see the site in a bit more detail. So the site is surrounded by residential development. To the south is Victory Park. Here is the Brislington Trading Estate. Here's Broom Hill Road. Here's the Broom Hill Local Centre, where there's a number of the shops. Here's Broom Hill Junior School, and here's the Mama and Papa's Day Nursery. So in sustainability terms, the site is considered to be a sustainable location because it's surrounded by...
I'm really sorry to interrupt you, Richard. Can you move the mic a little bit
Yeah, I
more
can't
in front
move
of
it
you?
very
Because every time you
easily.
turn away, we can't hear you so much.
Is that okay?
That's better.
Better?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll move my seat. That's probably easier, isn't it? So yeah, you'll see that the site comprises 6 fields, which are all separated by 8 hedgerows. These are all classified as important in the hedgerows regulations, 1997. There's a couple of public rights of way running through the site. One runs from west to east here and runs from along the eastern site boundary here. There's a woodland here and there's another woodland to the south. The site is dissected at the bottom by some overhead electricity pylons. They run from east to west, and you'll see some photos of them shortly. So this is the proposed site access to Broom Hill Road. Sorry, I'll just show you where that is. So that's here. There's a former police station, but it's been demolished. So this will be the only vehicle access to the site. This is what it looks like. So this is looking east along Broom Hill Road. This is where the former police station was, and this is the woodland in the background. So this is Bombville Road. So to the right of where these cars are is the trading estate. So where this grey car is here, that is going to be a proposed access point for emergency vehicles only and pedestrian access. This is the other pedestrian access on the other side of the site from School Road. You'll see the overhead pylons. So this is within the site. This is a kind of typical example of what the site looks like. It's sloping grassland, mature, important hedgerows and a number of TPO trees. This is one of the hedgerows that's to be removed, but these trees are to be retained. This is another view from the south, looking south from the northern part of the site. This is hedgerow 2, which is also important and is also proposed to be removed, as is this TPO tree here. So this is the site where it joins Victory Park. So I'm looking northeast here. There's the electricity pylon. And here's another hedge. This is hedgerow 2 from the south. This is also to be removed, and that's the tree that's to be removed as also. And this is looking northeast at the top of the site where the vehicle access is going to go. So this is woodland 2, and within this group of trees, there's another TPO tree that's to be removed. So the application is in outline, but they have submitted a number of plan drawings for approval. I haven't included any of the detailed access plan drawings because they're considered to be acceptable. So it's only the parameter plan drawings that we're going to be looking at today. So this is the access and movement plan. You'll see this is Broom Hill Road. Again, this is the only vehicle access to the site. This red line, this is the indicative primary street running through the site, and these are indicative secondary access points. The bits in grey are where the houses are going to go, and the white is public open space. The orange dotted line here and here, this shows where the public rights of way are going to go. The pink circles are pedestrian and cycle access points, and the green access is where the emergency vehicle and pedestrian access is going to be. Moving to the land use plan, you'll see that the areas in pink, this is going to be the residential development. The areas in green is going to be the open space. These kind of orangey bits, they're going to be access routes, and then this is an underground sewer connection here. Moving to the landscape plan, you'll see where the hedgerows compared to the photograph are going to be removed. So this hedgerow here is going, this hedgerow here, which has got a TPO tree in the middle of it's going, this hedgerow here is going, and then the proposed access is going to go through the woodland here and also result in the loss of a TPO tree here. The TPO trees that are being retained, their root protection areas are shown in orange, and then the bits of yellow are play areas, and then the pink bit there is a equipped play area. So moving to the height plan, the kind of grey-green bits at the top there, they're all going to be 2-storey. The pink bits are going to be 2.5 stories. The grey are going to be 3-storey. And then the red here is going to be the 4-storey elements. So in terms of public comment, the application was advertised by neighbour notification letter, site notice and press advert. A lot of objection to this one, 575 objections, 6 letters of support and 3 neutral. A lot of issues have been raised. They're all covered in my committee report, but the primary ones are here, mainly to do with the impact on biodiversity and ecology, loss of open space, loss of important and ancient hedgerows, loss of trees, and impact on the local highway network. So as Gary explained before, we've brought the application before you today, not for determination, but for agreement on our reasons for refusal, which will form the basis of our case at inquiry. The first reason for refusal relates to the significant harm to biodiversity, which provides neither adequate mitigation or compensation. Therefore, the application is considered contrary to the development considerations of the allocation, which I mentioned before, and then a number of other local plan policies. The second reason for refusal relates to the failure of the retention of important hedgerows and trees within the proposal site. Again, this is contrary to the development considerations of the allocation in various other local plan and national planning policies. The third reason for refusal relates to the loss and deterioration of irreplaceable habitat without either a wholly exceptional reason or suitable compensation strategy. Again, this is contrary to development considerations and local plan policies. Reasons for refusal 4 relates to the failure of the development to adhere to landscape and urban design policy considerations by virtue of excessive damage to existing features on site. Finally, there's another reason for refusal that relates to the fact that because we're recommending refusal and we aren't determining the application, there's a failure to agree under Section 106 various contributions and planning obligations that are required to mitigate the impacts of development. So I'll pass over to Gary to explain the last slide.
Thank you, Richard. And so they're the 5 putative reasons for refusal that we propose to defend at the public inquiry. And in addition to that, because of the inquiry, we're putting forward this additional aspect to the recommendation as well. And that's to request a delegated authority to myself and also the head of legal services to do the following, that are kind of standard processes as part of any appeal or inquiry, but just for the avoidance of doubt. So first of all, to draft and sign the council statement of case for the appeal, which is actually due on Friday, so it's well advanced, but obviously it will be subject to the resolution that you make today. To agree and sign the statement of common ground for the appeal. So just to explain briefly, what the planning inspector is always really keen to know about is what are the differences between the parties, because obviously there's lots of issues, but what's agreed and what's not agreed. So there's a document called the statement of common ground that both parties work on. It usually takes a lot of time, but at least there the inspector is then presented with a statement that both sides can sign up to, and then leaving what the clear areas of dispute are, and they will be in the 5 reasons for refusal. And thirdly, to negotiate and complete a Section 106 obligation that can be negotiated with the applicant that mitigates the impact of the development. Now, that is something that would be used then in the event that the inspector granted permission for the scheme. So in no way does it prejudice the council's case at all, but it's something that the inspector will require to be before them before they decide on the appeal. And fourthly, to prepare and present the evidence on behalf of the council based on the recommended reasons for refusal. And that evidence is due to be submitted in detail in the first week of the new year. And then finally, a catch-all to take all necessary decisions arising during the course of the inquiry proceedings relating to the presentation of the council's case. And because inquiries can be fairly dynamic, so it would be to allow myself in liaison with the head of legal services to make those decisions, but clearly anything significant I'd be discussing with the chair of the committee anyway. So that's our presentation, Chair. Thank you.
Fabulous, thank you very much. Thinking maybe, does anybody have any questions about what we're being asked to do today? If we want to cover that first. Everybody clear and understood? Good, great. Does anybody have any questions? No? Okay, good, great. Does anybody have anything that they would like to say generally on this particular thing? Andrew.
Yeah, I think it's always regrettable when we're in this situation, or where the decision has effectively been taken out of control of the council, and and the council's committees, and moved to the secretary to the planning inspectorate. However, we are where we are. I'd like to thank the officers for the time and effort they've put into compiling this comprehensive defence of or comprehensive reasons for refusal, and I'll be supporting it.
Thank you. I'd obviously like to also echo that. Does anybody else have anything that they would like to say? No? Marvellous. That's good. Great. Well, thank you very much for all of your work. Is there anything else that you'd like us to... Yes, yeah, exactly. So, so are we not moving off the recommendation as such, are we?
You are, Chair, because there's a recommendation that says if the committee had the power, it would have refused permission for these five reasons, and then the other aspect of the recommendation that I talked about. So, yeah, we will need a mover, a seconder, and a vote.
Indeed. Okay, so I'm going to propose that. Who would like to second? Oh, well, I mean, Guy did move fastest. So I'm going to let Guy second it for this on this occasion. All those in favour, should we do a hand raise?
Please keep it up so I can count. I can't see your hand, Chris. It's not up.
Is Chris might be wanting? Chris is voting. Okay, great.
Okay.
I think that's unanimous. Great. Thank you very much. I will take any against and any abstentions. So I don't think there is anybody left to do that. So fabulous. You were voting, weren't you, for it? You were voting in favour of it? Yes? Yes. Good. Great. Excellent. Thank you very much. That draws that particular item to a close. We'll allow it...
Vote on the delegated authority, or just assume that it comes with it?
Yeah, it's
It's all part of it, isn't it? Yeah, great. All right, well, we'll let our officers shimmy around and move on to item number 2, which is the former school site on New Fosseway Road. So, Guy.
Excuse me, Chair. Sorry, I was just wondering while the officers shimmy around if it would be possible to just get a quick update on what we might see next in terms of that application. What should we keep an eye out for in terms of the inspectors working? If there's anything you can tell us at this point.
The next stages are we will now complete and submit our statement of case to the inspector by the end of Friday, and that's the same applies to all the other parties. Then we need to continue working on a statement of common ground with the applicants. Then there is a case management conference which is just for the interested parties. It's not a public meeting. That's happening next Wednesday. That's essentially a discussion between the principal parties and the inspector. That's all about planning the 11 days and whether 11 days is enough or too long. So, and then by the end of the first week of January, all parties have to submit their proofs of evidence into the inspector as well. The statement of case, statement of common ground, proofs of evidence, they will all be held on the council's website, so we'll direct interested parties to that as well, and all the appeal documentation will be on there as well. And then the big day then is the 31st of January, and that's sort of day one of the inquiry, and that's when the inspector opens the inquiry. You get the opening statements from the appellants, from ourselves and the other interested party, because I think it's a combination of the tree forum and the local group as well. And then we're into the process of the inquiry, and the inspector will hear evidence from all parties. That concludes, I think, by the end of February, given or it actually might be mid-March, given the stretched time, because it runs for 2 weeks. Then I think there's a 2-week gap, and then there's a final week. And then if that's when it ends, the inspector will go away, write up their decision, and we will receive the decision. So the usual type of tension you get when you go through these things, really. And we'll keep you updated throughout.
Marvellous. Thank you for that little interval filler there. That's very helpful. Okay, so we're going to move on now to the former school site at the new Fosseway Road. Our first speaker is Graham Brown. If you'd like to come up to the microphone, please, if you are here. Does not appear to be here. Okay, so we'll move on to Paul Howarth, please.
Thank you, Chair. The site has been allocated for housing for almost a decade, and supporting your officer's recommendation today can mark a very important step to realising the delivery of much-needed new homes for Bristol. In summary, the proposals will contribute towards the core strategy's target of providing 30,600 new homes in the period 2006 to 2026. It will see the delivery of a policy-compliant level of affordable homes. It will enable extra care accommodation to form a central part of the site that positively contributes towards the creation of a mixed, balanced and inclusive community. It will make an efficient use of a previously developed land. It will provide small-scale ground floor active uses, which will be part of the extra care that will support the provision of local services for residents, adding vitality and a sense of place. There are parameter plans that will lock in a high-quality place while safeguarding residential amenity and improving biodiversity. Please support your officer's recommendation and approve this application to enable the delivery of much-needed new homes.
Thank you.
Site.
Thank you very much.
Positively responds to the council's climate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Time is up. Thank you very much. Okay, Councillor Helen Holland, please.
Thanks very much, Chair, and I'm making this statement in my capacity as the Cabinet Member for Adult Social Care. This application ticks so many boxes. As it's already been said, it's an allocated site, it's a brownfield site, and as Council we've made a commitment to protect as much green space as we can. And we also have the ambition to deliver as much extra care housing as we can. As I've said in my statement, many of the people, and I know that there isn't anybody here from Stockwood, but when the extra care facility was being built in Stockwood, there were local residents going to the building site and saying, how do we get one of the flats in here? And I think maybe there's a little bit of misunderstanding about what extra care is, because I was just reading the comments in the public statements about the extra pressure on the GP surgeries and so on. But many of these residents will be people who live locally and will already be registered with those GPs. It makes, because it's the council's own site, it makes it much easier for us to get this right mix on the site, and I do hope that you'll support it.
Thank you very much. Okay, and then I think we have Christiana speaking on behalf of Richard Hills. Yes? Oh, she is. Okay, good.
Hi, I'm Christiana Magariou from Gorham Homes. We're excited for this development on a brownfield land and site that has been empty for over a decade to create a multi-generational community providing over 100 affordable homes. Bristol desperately needs new homes. There are around 18,000 households on the housing waiting list and more than 1,000 homeless households in temporary accommodation. Building affordable homes in the right places must be our #1 priority. Here we're creating a high number of affordable homes, including extra care homes for older people, helping them to stay in their own community and reduce demands on the care system too. If approved, we'll continue to work with the community. We're ambitious. We'll ensure that more than half of these homes are affordable. We'll build net zero carbon homes, reducing the cost of living and tackling the climate crisis, and we'll enhance the wildlife with biodiversity net gain, addressing the ecological crisis. This scheme already has been awarded a Building with Nature accreditation, so we hope you feel able to approve this application today following the officer's recommendation so we can deliver much needed affordable homes in these tough economic times.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, I think the light was...
Yeah, no, we forgot the lights. Yeah, so we out. Okay, sorry, and then Claudette McDonald, please. Sorry, I got my order mixed up.
Good afternoon. I'm Claudette MacDonald from the Council's Housing Delivery Team. This outline application will enable the former school site to be developed for housing as its preferred destination within the local plan and regenerate this brownfield site. The outline application at New Fosseway is policy compliant, as already been stated, and will deliver 200 new homes with an extra care housing scheme at the heart of this new community. The homes on the site will contribute to the Council's Project 1000, Affordable Housing Delivery Plan, and the extra care housing will also contribute to the Better Lives at Home programme with adult social care. The city desperately needs new homes, particularly affordable homes. There are almost 18,000 households on the Council's housing waiting list and more than 1,100 homeless households living in temporary accommodation. The Council have allocated the new Fosseway site to Gorham Homes within their development pipeline, and they will be delivering the site with their joint partner.
Lovely, thank you very much. And then Grace Blizzard, please.
Hello, I'm Grace Blizzard from WSP, acting as transport consultant on behalf of the applicant. This outline planning application has been prepared in active consultation with the Transport Development Management Department of Bristol City Council. This included pre-application scoping agreement and subsequent submission of a transport assessment and framework residential travel plan. A comprehensive package of measures has been proposed to mitigate the impacts of the scheme, including a stage 1 road safety audit at proposed site access junctions to ensure they operate in a safe manner, parking provision close to maximum adopted standards aligning with local car ownership levels, financial contributions to cover associated traffic regulation orders and improvements to local bus stop facilities, and commitment to an on-site car club and electric vehicle charging provision. As a result, the residual impact of the development has been demonstrated not to be significant. It aligns with the transport policies set out by the Bristol local plan and meets the severity test of the National Planning Policy Framework. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I've got everybody that is supposed to have spoken, but were you wanting to speak as well, Andrew?
Yeah.
Okay, come. Seeing as you're here,
Okay.
it seemed odd.
I'll just do it from this mic and then I'll move
No,
back.
if you could come up, though, to make it clear. And then when you return, if you could sit not in your committee seat, but somewhere else, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Members will have seen my statement, as well as those of local residents. And the concerns raised mirror many that we see with applications at this committee. Concerns over access to the site, parking pressures within and around the site, and the potential for overshadowing. My key request is that members ask themselves 2 questions. First, if this was in your ward, would you be satisfied that my residents' concerns had been fully understood, addressed and mitigated? And secondly, ask yourself if the outline permission is watertight or whether there are any loose ends within it that will have been deemed to have been settled today, if it's approved, but may not become apparent until the reserved matters application, by which time it will be too late.
Thank you very much. Now, is there anybody else that I haven't called up that wishes to speak and has put a statement in and I haven't called them for this item? No? Okay, that is fantastic. Okay, so colleagues, we have the presentation on our laptops that we can follow along on our own screens, so we don't have to peer up at this. We also had the site visit today, but it was an informal site visit that myself and Councillor Chris Jackson attended, and the non-attendance of that won't preclude you from taking part in this item. Over to you, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. So this is an application for outline planning permission for up to 200 homes and 250 square metres of flexible retail, commercial or community floor space. As you're aware, all matters are reserved except for access. There are a couple of things just to draw your attention to on the amendment sheet. So there's just a typo in the report in relation to the affordable housing policy. So that refers to the standard for Bristol North, but it's actually for Bristol South. It's the same 30% that's required, but it was just a typo. And then also I've added a list of planning conditions for members' consideration as well. So yeah, if you could please review those as well alongside the committee report, which you have. There's also an error just in the committee pack from the applicant's supporting documents. So that is on the tree protection and removal plan. So that's been annotated the wrong way round. So the trees that are identified, or sorry, the trees in the landscaping that's identified for removal are to be retained. So that's the green, and then the blue is the areas to be removed. So we have received this morning an updated plan showing that. So that will form part of the approved plans rather than the plan that you've got in front of you today. But yeah, apologies for that. So just moving on then to the main part of the presentation. So the application site is located on the site of the former Bush School, just to the north of New Fosseway Road and to the west of Wells Road in Hengrove, South Bristol. The site shown on screen is currently vacant, although there are some van dwellers using the site temporarily. You can see that there are two main areas to the site. So you've got an area of hard standing on the southern part of the site, and then you've got an area of green space to the north, which is formerly used as the playing pitches and sports pitches associated with the school use that was previously on the site. You can also see that there's the Oasis Academy, John Williams, to the northwest of the site here. So that's a 3-storey building. And you can see the existing properties that run along the Wells Road there. And then there's the veterinary surgery just off Petherton Road to the north. As mentioned, this is a previously developed site, so there's this is just an image of the school that was previously on there. So you can see that the range of different building heights on the slide there. So ranging from sort of 1 story up to 3 stories in height on the site. And then this building just on the left-hand side of the image is the Bush Resource Centre, which is currently still in use, but doesn't form part of the red line boundary for this application. These images just show the existing access arrangements into the site. So this is the main access down onto New Fosseway Road. So looking south, there's a couple of piers that are gate piers at the far end of that image there, which will be removed. And then this is the existing access into the Bush Centre, which is proposed to be relocated in the site. And this is just the hard standing area that you can see. So you can see in the distance here, there are some properties that are on the Wells Road here. You can see sort of where the previous school was located as well. And again, here's just an image looking out to the west, out to the east rather. So this shows the relationship to the properties along Wells Road. You can see that there's an existing tree there that's proposed to be retained. And then the area of fencing along the line here, that's proposed to be retained with then additional landscaping within the plans. And then this is just showing the northern end of the site. So you can see this is where the playing fields are. And members would have seen that site this morning, sorry. And then also you can see the outline of the 3-storey John Williams Academy up to the northwest. Members will be aware that there are 2 accesses proposed as part of this application. So this is the location of the proposed pedestrian, cycle and emergency access. This is currently being used as a vehicular access for the NHS building, the Petherton Resource Centre. The proposal is that this would be changed to a shared surface and then access provided. So effectively a sort of hole punched through that hedging on the north side of the site there. So just to reiterate, this is application is for outline permission only, and then therefore the information for approval today is limited to access the overall quantum of development, so whether 200 homes can be comfortably accommodated on the site, and then also the parameter plans that are set out in the pack that you've received. There are a number of also illustrative plans that are included. So this includes a master plan, tree ecology reports and sustainability information to identify that in principle those policy requirements can be met. If approved today, this outline planning application, there would then be a requirement to submit a further reserve matters or potentially more than one reserve matters application to secure full details of the appearance, layout, scale and landscaping, and updated documents would need to be submitted for approval as part of those reserve matters. And as noted, this proposed development would be on a allocated site, and as such the principle of development is considered to be acceptable in accordance with policy BCS 5. So there's been 2 rounds of public consultation, so 18 comments received in response to the first round of public consultation, and then 16 for the further second round of public consultation. That second round of consultation was undertaken on the basis of some additional highway plans that were proposed. So they sought to add a couple of features to North Peverton Road and to New Fosseway Road, which I'll come to later on in the presentation. The key concerns from residents were around transport impacts such as traffic and parking, whether the accesses were adequate, and impacts upon biodiversity, and then also concerns about residential amenity. But they are listed in full within my committee report as well, which members have. So as I mentioned, there's a number of parameter plans which are sought for approval. So these parameters within these plans will be conditioned to ensure that the principles are adhered to for those reserve matters. This first one here just shows the site structure. So it has the key principle of the green buffers, which are located shown in green on the plan. So you've got the green buffers along the edges of the site, here and here, and then also a principle of an open space within the centre of the site. There's also a proposal for improved pedestrian connectivity through the site and cycle connectivity. That would also allow access for emergency services as well if the southern access was blocked. So you've got improved pedestrian permeability through the site. And then also just in terms of the development blocks themselves, so care's obviously been taken to ensure that these are positioned away from nearby residents where possible. So where the closest residents are to the north of the site, there's areas of landscape which have been ensure that the development blocks don't encroach onto their amenity. As I mentioned, there's a couple of highway mitigation measures which are proposed as part of this application to ensure that the access is safe. So the site access plan, which is shown here on New Fosseway Road, would include extension of double yellow lines and keep clear markings at the access points. The addition of a raised table, which is shown in red on the plan there. The removal of the brick piers to allow sufficient visibility from the entrance, and then also drop curbs and tactile paving to accommodate pedestrians. And then in terms of the the Petherton Road entrance, that would include a shared access for pedestrians and cyclists and emergency access, the addition of lighting and signage, as well as a speed hump to slow travel movements from the NHS site itself. There are also a number of sustainable transport measures proposed, including bus stop enhancements, car club spaces within the site, and a travel plan to encourage sustainable measures of methods of transport. In terms of design, there are a couple of parameter plans which are shown on here. So these basically ensure that the principle of the lowest height development is located closest to the residential properties. And then we step from sort of 1.5 to 2 stories on the edges of the development. So where the lighter green is here, up to 3 and 4 stories for the extra care blocks, and those that are located further away from the dwellings on Wells Road. In terms of these plans here, so they set the maximum heights, but there would obviously be an assessment of daylight and sunlight in full as part of any subsequent reserve matters application, given that the design of the dwellings hasn't been fixed at this application. And this just shows how those principles could be shown within a future master plan. So again, stepping up from sort of 1.5 to 2 stories along the edges here, and then the primary streets being fronted by 3-story townhouses. And this just shows the illustrative master plan. So again, shows that principle of having the open space within the centre, tree-lined streets, a mixture of flatted and house-type development with an extra care hub located centrally within the site, and then the connectivity through from north to south. There have been quite a number of different comments about residential amenity. So there's a couple of plans I'm going to run through now. These demonstrate that the 21 metre minimum separation distance can be achieved based on the illustrative master plan. So that's what we call the rule of thumb. It's not a minimum, but it's a good principle to include 21 metre separation distances between existing and proposed dwellings where they are where they're directly facing each other. That means that there would be no overlooking between the existing properties and those proposed. And that just shows the relationship between the properties at the south end of the site. So you can see that all of the gardens on the southern end of the site here are well in excess of the 21 metres, and I think the closest one here is 23 metres from the site. So whilst biodiversity and green infrastructure is a reserved matter, the applicant has submitted information to confirm that biodiversity net gain can be achieved, and we have got a condition that requires a full BNG assessment to be submitted at reserved matter stage. At the moment, that demonstrates that there can be a 12% increase on biodiversity on the site. And then also there are some trees to be lost on site, so that's 13 out of the 46 on site. However, all the significant trees that are on the site are to be retained. They are all located largely within the landscape buffers that are proposed. And then the indicative plan, so the illustrative master plan, shows at least 90 trees being planted, so there's a significant increase in trees on site. And then finally, just on sustainability, so the applicant's been able to demonstrate that there's a 36% reduction in CO2 emissions on site. As been mentioned before, they've applied for and been successful in getting Building with Nature accreditation, and then also submitted a BREEAM Communities assessment and demonstrated a pass with that. Obviously, all of that will be subject to further assessment again, but again, it's been conditioned that they need to meet those requirements as part of any future reserve matters application. So as such, we're recommending that the application is granted subject to planning agreement and conditions, and for the obligations that are shared on screen now. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. For the first question, could you just give a bit of an explanation as to what extra care means, just so everybody is clear about that, please?
Yes, so effectively they're almost treated like traditional residential flats. However, they do have an element of care provided. That ranges on a case-by-case basis, and it can be anything from sort of helping people get to the shops to them providing specific on-site care depending on their needs. But effectively, they are treated as typical sort of residential flats, but they're within a specific community. So it wouldn't be like a sort of C2 care home, for example. However, one thing that has sort of been reflected within the application submission is there is a slightly lower car ownership expected. So that's reflected in the calculations and why the parking is slightly lower than the full parking standards that we've got.
Is it something that would have perhaps once become termed like supported care or supported living, rather, type of accommodation?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's supported living. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Lovely, fabulous. Thank you very much.
They have lots of different names for these things, so they're all very similar.
Exactly. It's just good to kind of use all the different words so that everybody knows exactly what we're talking about. Fabulous. Questions? Would anybody like to ask any questions? Guy?
Thank you. I'd just like to ask why the calculation was that this particular kind of, the extra care housing would require fewer cars. My possibly prejudiced assumption would have been that it would make it less likely that people would be able to walk, cycle, use voice scooters, might need possible occasional carer attendance. My assumption would have been more spaces, not fewer, and I was wondering what the rationale was.
Sorry, so perhaps that was put poorly. There'd be a lower level of car ownership expected. So there would be things like visitor parking, for example, but that would be subject to the further reserve matters application. So at the moment, it's been estimated that there'd be, I think, over 212 car parking spaces in the transport assessments, which TDM have reviewed, and they're satisfied with that based on car ownership levels.
I'm going to take Katya's hand and you can ponder your follow-up.
The question I wanted to ask is, has there been any work done with the schools, particularly St Bernadette's? Before I became a councillor, I've worked in both St Bernadette's and the John Williams Academy Oasis, and I know the road by St Bernadette's and the primary school next to it are utter chaos at mornings and pickup times. Has there been any work done to try and mitigate that from happening?
Yes, so the road that is used to access John Williams Academy won't be available for cars to use for this development. So I think the applicant was very keen that that wasn't used. So that was obviously informed by consultation with the school. So that would be a pedestrian and cycle access only. And sort of effectively increase pedestrian movements through onto that road.
I did actually mean St Bernadette's, because as we're having worked in both the schools, the St John Oasis Academy is not nearly as bad as St Bernadette's. But St Bernadette's, the school doesn't have enough parking for the teachers for a start, and the road there is absolute chaos in the mornings. To the point of where if you're a school teacher, you come really, really early to avoid the traffic.
Yeah, so we wouldn't be seeking to solve issues with parking on existing sites. But yeah, I appreciate that obviously there is an increase in cars as a result of this development, which is why the car parking is proposed on the site. And there is that scheme of highway mitigation that's proposed on New Fosseway Road to avoid, well, it increases the amount of double yellow lines and the school keep clear in that area to avoid parking in that area to make sure that the access is safe. Matthew, I don't know whether there's anything that you wanted to add to that as well from a TDM perspective.
I mean, I think I'd have said the same thing, that there's a scheme of mitigation measures, so the raised table and the double yellow lines, and we've done a road safety audit, so it'll be better than what's there. But I think I'd also flag that it's a problem across the city, and it's a pre-existing problem. Bad behaviour around schools, and that's more of an enforcement issue, and there's no reason why this should make it worse. It may make it better because there are more places where people could park, but it's neutral. It's kind of outside what this application is. Pre-existing, I would say.
Yeah, I guess it's worth pointing out that the intention is at the moment that the internal access road would be adopted, so there may actually be more spaces to park, whereas obviously at the moment it's not available for people to park within it. So yeah, there could be options for more parking, but obviously that would be subject to the reserve matters application.
I've got a question about parking as well, actually, and about the enforcement of parking on site, because on our site visit this morning we did notice a lot of pavement parking, even if there were double yellow lines, or a lot of people parking there anyway. What kind of enforcement? Because a lot of that parking is potentially coming from like the NHS building there in the Bush Centre. Where are they going to park if we remove that option?
Yes, so for the NHS there is, we didn't actually go into it, but there is a car park round that fronts onto Wells Road, so there is a car park available there. There proposed to be parking restrictions on that access to make sure that that access is safe. In terms of enforcement, that would be enforced effectively by traffic wardens, but I don't know, Matthew, again, whether there's anything that you want to add in terms of how we can enforce parking restrictions.
I mean, I suppose there's the two separate issues you mentioned. There's the pavement parking, which is a problem across the city, but we do have the power to put in traffic regulation orders, so where there are yellow lines, it would be enforced, as anywhere else in the city.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Guy, have you thought your follow-up? Or I'll take the reins hand if...
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Chair. I think I just got a couple of observations, really, just based on some of the objections. And I guess we can't really sort of avoid the question about access to GPs and the housing density issue. And I know that you know, there is a problem across some areas in Bristol. It's really difficult and challenging to get GP access, etc. But I'm just curious about, is there any sort of proposal to have some on-site, say, pharmacists or, you know, any kind of medical kind of facility? I know it might seem extreme, but I'm just curious as to if that's been considered, because it is a genuine sort of concern, I think.
Yeah, so the actual sort of layout and internal workings of the extra care unit will be determined at the reserve matters stage. It is worth noting that this application will pay CIL, so Community Infrastructure Levy, so that payment goes towards infrastructure in this within Bristol. Obviously that's determined on a variety of different projects and is determined by councillors, but that is supposed to be the mechanism for securing things like that as well.
Oh, well, I'm not an expert on CIL, but I don't know if CIL is responsible for providing medical facilities, so I'd probably take yeah, I'm not sure about that. But I think it's more just in response to the concerns that if there are going to be an extra 200 properties, potentially 400 you know, times 2 for the amount of capacity of people living in the accommodation, as to whether that's something that we should just be concerned about. You know, just thought it is important, and you know, you can't get through to my surgery for love or money, so it is a genuine concern.
Chair, and councillors have made a very relevant point there, and you know, there is that. I mean, the site's allocated for development, so you know the principle is accepted. There is that whole issue about the social infrastructure that needs to accommodate growth as well, and that's a really difficult one for certainly a planning authority to you know, have a lot of certainty over, and even the council, because it's all done in partnership with, you know, the NHS and Care Quality Commission and bodies like that, really. So it has to be more of a partnership approach, really. It's not really something solely for either the council or especially for the local planning authority, but it's absolutely a valid point. But, you know, that it's allocated in the local plan. I think what, as a planning authority, what it has to do is kind of go with that and then work with partner organisations in trying to provide that social infrastructure.
There's an important.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got a question around the brownfield element of it, because I noticed when we were on our site visit earlier, quite a lot of it was football field that Councillor Jackson spent some time on as a child. He told us in much detail today. Yep, there's an adult. Can you tell us about how, even though a lot of it looks like a field, the sort of the brownfield element of that?
Yes, yeah, no problem. So, yeah, the entire site is classed as brownfield land, and that's effectively because there's been a use on it. Whilst part of the site might look like a green field, it is not a greenfield site as such. So, yeah, the site itself is classed as sort of previously developed land as a result of that, and obviously it has had human activity on it, different to sort of farming or something that you might expect on a greenfield site.
Lovely, thank you very much. Do we have any questions, or are we ready to go on to the debate? Guy?
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering if one of the officers could just give us a very brief outline of the implications of this being, in effect, a two-stage application of reserved matters and a sort of outline decision that we're making today, in terms of what our decision options are beyond the officer's recommendation.
Gary, do you want to say that? Sorry. So are you saying, in terms of the options, it could be to approve or refuse on the basis, so approve on the basis of the officer's recommendation, refuse, bearing in mind that the things that are under consideration today, I mentioned earlier on in the report, are access, so key issues around highway safety. Obviously the MPPF gives us the steer that we can only refuse applications on the basis where the transport impact is severe. So that's a real steer from sort of national guidance that we've got there. And then also in terms of the overall quantum of development, so do we think that the site can no way take 200 homes? I would point members into the direction of the allocation, which is for 175 homes. So given the sort of direction that we've got from the Urban Living SPD around intensification and densification, we consider that to be acceptable as well.
Correct me if I'm wrong, I think your question was more about the fact it's a two-stage application. So this is outline planning, and then it'll come back.
Oh yes,
later.
sorry. So
But
yeah,
like,
there will be a separate reserve matters application. It may come forward as a couple of different applications. So I think given that there's an extra care use as well as a residential use, for example, it could be that there's a reserve matters application just for the extra care use, which would show appearance, landscaping, scale, all those things within that application. So you'd effectively have a full application in front of you to determine there. And then potentially there could be another reserve matters for the residential, or it could come forward all as one. But yeah, we would obviously bring that to members again for consideration as part of a future planning committee.
And perhaps maybe more of a Gary question, just a quick overview of the difference between outline permission, which is what we're doing today, and the second stage.
Yes, so I guess the application that we all understand more easily is a full application where you've got the design of everything, even the elevations of the houses, the buildings and everything. An outline application, it kind of gives you some details, absolutely nailed down, like the access arrangements. And then you've got this kind of halfway house as well, which is the parameter plans. And so there's a difference in the presentation between what are the parameter plans, which are kind of technical plans, and Alex is busy giving an example of them there. That doesn't show a development, but it shows like a framework for future development to come forward. And so it isn't a complete blank page for how the development could come forward. In order to be a valid reserve matters application, the proposals would have to accord with the parameters, both in terms of the where it's situated, the height, access arrangements and things like that. And then also in the presentation, if Alex moves on one or two, the illustrative. So that is an indication of what might come in for reserve matters, because a development like that would accord with the parameters, but it might be something different. But either way, the local planning authority will be able to assess the scheme when it gets to that level. But at this stage, you're being asked to grant outline permission with the access details and also the parameters of the development. So the broad kind of, the limits of development and heights, but the actual detail will come forward at a later stage at reserve matters that will show how the applicants have responded to those parameters in reality. Lorraine?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Gary. Can I just ask a couple more questions, actually? First of all, because I know I was going to forget, do we have any indication about the demand for extra care housing? I know Councillor Holland mentioned that but people have approached her about it, but I'm wondering, do we have any indication so that when it doesn't get to if it gets to the final planning stage, that we don't suddenly have a plan which is for 1%, extra care housing and 99, I got that right, other. So is there kind of an indication that it will be 100 extra care homes, or is that also fluid in regards to the final design? And I was going to ask something else. Sorry, I've forgotten. Okay.
It's up to 200 homes across the site, and that's up to 70 extra care units and up to 130 residential properties. Traditional sort of C3 use class dwelling houses. So there wouldn't be a situation where we would get say 160 or 170 use class C3 dwelling houses and then only 30 extra care units, they would have to provide them in accordance with that. So it'd be up to 130 C3 dwelling houses and up to 70 extra care apartments.
But the second part of my question, which was demand. Do we know the current demand for extra care housing? Thank you.
Yeah, apologies. I will be 1 second and just try and dig that out of my report. But yeah, effectively the applicant has included a sort of needs assessment as part of the application and demonstrated that. I think one of the members of the applicant team referred to the amount of people on the waiting list as well for the sort of affordable housing and for extra care housing. So there is significant demand for this type of housing within Bristol, as well as affordable housing, which obviously this application meets the sort of policy requirements for.
We're just waiting for the officer to find the answer, I think, still. I think he was going to...
Sorry, yeah, and it's not specifically referred to in my report in terms of the demand, so apologies, but hopefully that's answered your question.
Okay, brilliant, fabulous. Shall we move to the debate? Does anybody have anything that they'd like to say or any particular thoughts to share? Yeah, no? Well, I mean, nobody has to. Do you want to, Guy? And then Chris.
Thank you, Chair. There's an awful lot to like here. It's clearly addressing an unmet need in terms of our extra care housing and our affordable housing. It looks like it's very high quality new housing in an area that can stand higher footprint and higher density. It looks very, very positive in terms of the outline that's put in front of us. All of my concerns relate to reserved matters. And given the explanation that we've had, I think I'll probably be voting for it. I'm almost certain. If someone wants to persuade me not to, go for it. But that's where I'm at currently. I find these split applications very challenging, in the sense that you kind of feel like you're making the council a hostage to fortune to some extent. We're agreeing to the overall principle of it without seeing any of the detail, and that is where all the problems, in my experience, always come from. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, it sort of somewhat feels like it defeats the object of a planning committee to have it split in this way, which can be quite a frustrating sensation. Chris?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thanks for the presentation and the visit this morning. I'm more than happy to support this as it is. I agree with some of the things that Guy said, but I'd like to see more assisted homes there, because every time we put somebody in one of them, we free up a family home somewhere else. So it will definitely be getting my support, and I do like the layout of it as well. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. And if there's no other burning desires to say anything, okay, one from Leslie, then we'll move on. Oh, into the mic though, please. But can you do it into the mic, otherwise we can't hear the comment.
It's just a comment really, because I've got an extra care home in my ward and it's very popular and it's quite difficult to get into. So there is a demand.
Fabulous. Well, with that, shall we move to a vote? We'll move the officer recommendation. Who would like to second it? Chris? Okay, excellent. And for this one, we'll do a little roll call and we'll move round. We'll start with Leslie. Can you do it into the microphone though? Otherwise we can't hear what you've said.
Yes, I support it.
Thank you very much. Chris?
Yes, also I support it.
Thank you. Lorraine?
4.
Guy?
Also 4.
Katja?
4.
Chris?
4.
Fabulous. And 4 for myself as well, so that's unanimous again. Thank you very much. That's 7, we're nice and quiet. Excellent, brilliant. Thank you very much for your work. We'll move on to the next exciting agenda item, which is we are changing officers around. So the next item that we have is land at Derby Street, and we'll just give it a couple of moments to move everybody around. Excellent. We're actually doing it have the same officer twice in a row, very excitingly. Okay, so we will move on to the public forum. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so the next item is land at Derby Street. I can see that Rob Breyer is not here. Is Ollie Hayden here? No? Okay, great. What we'll do is we'll move on to the officer presentation again, which we have slides for in our laptops. Over to you, Alex. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. So this is an application for full planning permission for temporary move-on accommodation for 8 single-bed dwellings. So the application is just to the south of Church Road in St George. It's to the rear of shops, flats and a pub on Church Road. So you can just see Church Road running east to west along the centre of the screen there. This image just shows the uses in and around the site. So the site is occupied by the car park on this slide, and you've got the blocks of flats located centrally here, and you've got shops and a couple of pubs to the north of the site. To the south of the site there is the St George's preschool. You've got residential accommodation in a mixture of sort of 1 and 2 story dwellings on this side, and then there's the Redfield Lodge care home on over to the southwest of the site. This is just an aerial view of the site, so you can see the existing car park, the existing trees on the site. You can see the 3-story blocks of flats behind, and as I say, the shops and the retail on the frontage. This shows the existing car park, so you can see that it's relatively little use at the moment on the car parking site. This area here to the northern end, to the eastern end of the site would be retained for parking, and the proposed dwellings would be located centrally within the site. This just shows a view looking west down Derby Street. So you've got Derby Street, which is being parked on here. You've got the footway. You've got a small area of green space along the centre, and then the car parking. And then you can see Padmore Court, which is the residential development just on the other side of the road here. And you can see that there's a number of trees between the application site and the proposals. And then this is the corner from Barn Street, which is the western end of the development. So this area here is to be retained for parking, and then the development itself, the 8 houses, would run up into the edge of that sort of blue wall where that white van is just on the slide. If I get my pointer over, I can just point that out. So it's just this location here up to where that black van is, so taking up a relatively small section of the site. So full planning permission is for the reconfiguration of the existing car park to provide 8 residential properties for use as homeless move-on accommodation. As I mentioned, the car parking on site would be reduced, so that would go from 45 car parking spaces on site to 23. There would be landscaping located between the 2 sets of the buildings, and the application is being brought forward by Hill Group in collaboration with the Salvation Army and Bristol City Council. So this is just the site plan, so you can see the 8 dwellings split into 2 groups of 4, so one located on the western side of the site and one on the eastern side of the site. there are the 25 car parking spaces being proposed on either side of that, and then the red hatched area just demonstrates where the landscaping would be. And then this landscape plan just shows in a little bit more detail the breakdown of the uses of the site. So you've got a public open space in the centre here, so landscaping. You've got some small front gardens to the front of the modular units. And then we've got private amenity space marked as the number 3s to the rear of each of the properties. And then number 4 just demonstrates where the cycle storage, bin storage, and also the communal air source heat pumps would be. In terms of the appearance of the dwellings, so they'd be a single story in height. You can see that there's the small area of amenity space to the front of each of the dwellings. They are a modular unit, so it's a standard typology that's been used in a couple of different locations by Hill Group in collaboration with charities providing the type of accommodation. So these units will effectively sit on top of the site with sort of small foundations within them, and as I say, they're a sort of standard typology that they've got there with a metal cladding and windows and a door to the front. In terms of the size of the dwellings, so they are below the national space standards. So they are at 24 square metres per unit. Typically, we'd expect that a single bedroom, single bed space dwelling would provide 37 square metres of space. However, we have determined that this is acceptable on the basis of the type of accommodation that it's providing. So it's providing accommodation specifically for homeless. So typically the alternatives would be obviously rough sleeping, sofa surfing, or sort of hostel living. The idea of the accommodation is to provide a stepping stone for people to provide sort of basically a sort of place to stay for up to 2 years, in order to allow them to get jobs, get onto the housing ladder, for example. So we have added a condition that limits the occupation of the building to no more than 2 years at any one time. And then just in terms of sort of levels of public interest, so there's been quite a few comments in response to the application. So 40 comments received in response, most of them in objection. The main concerns were from the preschool, which is located to the south of the site. In particular, there was a lot of concern around the kind of principle of the use and concerns about antisocial behaviour on the site, and the fact that it is a car park at the moment and that there's existing antisocial behaviour. We've assessed that actually the proposed development would improve the character of the area by providing natural surveillance for those residents on the site, and also take away the car parking space which people were using to sort of congregate later on in the evening, and then also providing lighting of the site and a sort of green space rather than a car parking environment. There are also some concerns around parking. Obviously there is a reduction of car parking available on the site, but the applicant submitted a car parking survey which demonstrates that there's more than sufficient car parking spaces on the site and around the St George Church Road sort of local centre, including the areas of the Chalks Road car park opposite. And in terms of the principle of development, generally we're supportive of that. Obviously there's a significant need for this type of housing within Bristol. And then just finally, just a couple of points. So in terms of sustainability, they're proposing communal air source heat pumps to address a reduction in CO2 emissions in accordance with policy BCS 14. So there's in excess of the 20% reduction proposed there. In terms of the scale and massing of the properties, they are effectively designed to minimise any visual intrusion on the on neighbours and reduce any risk of overshadowing or overlooking. Urban Design actually noted that the Derby Street car park previously was developed pre-war as a terrace of housing, so there's an opportunity for some urban repair there with the provision of the dwellings fronting onto Derby Street again, which obviously has been lost for the last sort of 60-70 years. As a result, we are recommending approval for the scheme subject to conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Alex. Okay, any questions? Chris, then Andrew, please.
Yeah, just one. In the key issues on my papers, it says scale and mass in keeping with urban repair for provision of a new tree-lined frontage into Marshall Walk.
Yeah, apologies.
There's
an error on that deck, so apologies. Yeah. That includes an old slide from another scheme, so apologies.
Yeah, but that's the one that's going on in my ward at the moment, which is double the size of this. But
yeah, apologies. Yeah, that's copied over incorrectly.
I just wanted clarification on that. Cheers.
Yeah, Alex is laying lots of traps to make sure we're paying attention today. It's great. Okay, Andrew?
Yeah, I've got 3 questions. One is the 2-year window for occupancy. And I just wondered if you had a comment on that. That seems to me quite long for temporary occupancy. I wondered if you had a comment on that at all.
Yeah, sorry, I was just trying to find the page of my report. So that's based on the guidance that we've received from the Salvation Army in terms of obviously people have to get onto a housing waiting list for more formal housing. So and things like the support package that's being offered by the Salvation Army. So they've guided that length of tenancy. That's the same tenancy length as we've included on the Marshall Walk scheme, which we took to committee back in the summer. I think it was this committee as well. And then also there's a couple of other schemes that Hill Group have put together using this solo house type of development, and those other councils have also placed the same limits on occupancy. So it's sort of threefold in terms of our approach. We're being consistent with other schemes in our area, consistent with other schemes of this type, and then also we've had the feedback from Salvation Army, which is suggesting that that is how long it takes to get people moving on into better forms of accommodation.
Thanks, that's a very full answer, so appreciate that. Can you talk a little bit around the agent of change situation vis-a-vis the pub? Because obviously the noise from a pub isn't just necessarily patrons, although that's obviously a big part of it, but you know, you get deliveries, you get the clearing out of bottles. Anyone who's ever lived near to a pub knows that can be quite rowdy. So what sort of mitigation measures are anticipated, and how's the agent of change going to work with that?
So I'll cover those two things. So one on noise, and then one on sort of servicing of the pubs. So we have a condition for a noise-sensitive premises assessment. That requires an assessment to be taken out. So basically, noise data being gathered from both the Dark Horse and I think it's the Fire Engine pubs, which are adjacent to the site. So that would collect noise data, work out when and how much noise is being generated by those uses, and we've also recommended that the applicant gets in touch with both of the pubs in terms of arranging and sort of a coordinated approach effectively, and then based on the information that's gathered within that noise data collection or the noise survey, there'd be recommendations within that report which are needing to be implemented. So that might include sort of triple glazing and insulation of the properties. The design of the building are such that they have incredible air tightness anyway to reduce any demands on heating. So it's expected that there's unlikely to be significant impacts in terms of noise anyway, but we want the data to back that up. So we've added that condition. In terms of servicing, so you might actually be able to see just on this slide here, there is some bins and servicing that are being used by the Dark Horse pub informally at the moment. So there is no formal access arrangement or servicing arrangement for them to do that with the council. They have been sort of just using the car parking spaces to service the property. With this application, the applicants actually sought to address that, and they formalised the servicing arrangement. So if I just return to the site plan, so you can see there's a sort of 5 metre width shown on the plan here. That's 5 metres to allow access for bins and servicing from the pub. So rather than being serviced from the car park, the bins can be taken and any other refuse from the back of the pub out to Derby Street, and then servicing can be undertaken there. That's based on feedback from Transport Development Management, where they advised that given that Church Road is obviously a sort of showcase bus route, significant sort of levels of traffic into town, that servicing shouldn't occur on the front there. So there's actually a bit of a benefit to the scheme in terms of managing servicing from the pub, and it formalises that arrangement for the Dark Horse. And they've also commented to say that they're sort of happy with that arrangement through the applicant.
Thank you. The other question I had, and although a fourth just popped into my head, but the other question I had was with regards to the blue roof. It's the first time I've actually heard that terminology. Obviously, green roofs quite commonly see. So can you give a very brief explanation of how the blue roof works? I assume it's sort of rainwater collection.
Yeah, absolutely. I had this conversation with my manager as well when we were slightly puzzled as to what it was. So we reviewed the application information. So effectively, it's sort of flood attenuation within the roof itself. So the idea is that they're designed to hold a level of water to a certain point, and then it will slowly soak away into the drainage. So it doesn't cause flooding is obviously caused typically by lots of water very quickly. So this slows the levels of water down into the site, so then it will drain normally into the surface drainage water systems. So that's what the blue roof is there.
Lovely, thank you very much. And if I can just abuse the microphone for one final question. So I'm looking at one of the diagrams, and it's got, the amenity areas at the front, which I guess could be used for garden purposes, and one of these mock-ups suggests that there's an area at the back. Is that like a refuse area or surface area?
So the main refuse areas and sort of cycle storage are just to the right-hand side of each of the properties as you look at the frontage. So they have provided plans to show that it's it's secure covered storage with Sheffield stands within them for the cycles, and then a secure store with a lock for the waste storage as well. So that will allow the collection. So that effectively leaves the areas to the rear to be sort of fenced off and then utilised by the residents. So there's rear accesses here. It's not a huge amount of open space. I think that's worth noting, but given that you've got the open space between the two sets of properties here, and then also you've got St George Park, which is located just to the northeast of the site, we consider that there's sort of a significant level of amenity or a sufficient level of amenity space for residents, and with the sort of small landscaped areas to the front as well.
Brilliant, thank you for your answers.
Thank you. Guy, then Lorraine.
Thanks, Chair. I was just looking at some of the conditions proposed, and I just wanted to raise a couple of things quickly. Under 10 on renewable energy, obviously the renewable energy aspects of our policy focus almost exclusively on reducing CO2 emissions. I was just wondering if cost of living was a factor here as well, or possibly one that we could reflect in that condition. I can't think of a time when reducing someone's energy bills might be more useful, and there might be a trade-off there to be considered. And I was just wondering if that was something that we were able to include or affect.
Yes, so I think I mentioned before about the levels of thermal efficiency of the building. So the design of the solo house, as it's called by the applicant, effectively provides this sort of level of air tightness that the space heating demands are very, very limited. So effectively it's managed by a sort of mechanical ventilation. So it's almost like having a fan heater. That's how little requirements there are. And then obviously you've got the air source heat pumps providing that on site, which will be maintained and renewed by as necessary by the applicant, and then sort of the council and Salvation Army once they take that on. So actually the cost of the energy usage and the amount of energy usage on site is going to be very limited.
Thank you very much. Chair, may I go for another one quickly? Oh, thank you. So, and the other one I was looking at was, conditions 19 and 20. I totally appreciate the need to ensure that it remains as move-on accommodation. I was just wondering if move-on accommodation was something where we needed to be quite so specific and rigorous in our application. Is this an area where we could potentially give a little bit more flexibility? For example, to the management plan mentioned in 20. I'm just thinking of cases where a little bit of flexibility there might be hugely to the benefit of one of the residents. And is that something we absolutely need to set in stone, or could we grant them more flexibility than that?
Yeah, I think we're keen to use those conditions to make sure that they're not used as sort of long-term residential use. I think given the size of the dwellings, they are below space standards, as I've mentioned, and we wouldn't want to see this sort of size of dwelling reflected for that long-term accommodation sort of across the city. That management plan has some sort of useful guidance, and that's been provided by the Salvation Army in terms of their approach. I guess if there was a requirement to make changes to that, then there are both the Section 73 processes and the Section 96A processes to make material amendments to conditions. So that could allow some further flexibility, but I think we're keen that these conditions are included to make sure that they are fit for purpose units for that sole purpose. Sorry, Gary, I think, did you want to come in?
Yes, thanks. Yes, so as Alex set out, really, I think the conditions are necessary because we've followed by our practice guidance, we've taken a relaxed approach to applying the nationally described space standards because of the nature of the accommodation. So because of doing that, we need the conditions on just there as a reminder that it is for a particular type of accommodation. But in terms of dealing with any deviation from those conditions, we would take a very softly approach and discuss it with our housing delivery colleagues and the Salvation Army if they're managing it as well. So it wouldn't be despite the understandable request for firmer enforcement, we wouldn't start here. It would be very softly.
Lorraine?
Thank you, Chair. Can I say Councillor on Church was actually first, but don't worry, Chair Randa. I know that area really, really well. I don't know whether I should have sort of declared that in the beginning because I only just sort of really considering it. I am right. So first of all, that car park is actually quite heavily used because there is nowhere to park on Church Road. So if you know Church Road, it's not, you can't park on there. There's only a few dedicated spaces on the main Church Road. So if you go to the shops and you are in your car because you're going shopping, there's an Aldi, Tesco's, along that main road, you often will filter if you just want to, into that car park. There are lots of shops. It's not just the pubs that are an issue. There is every single shop along the main Church Road backs into that car park. So it's not just about two pubs. With respect, I'm really sorry, pubs, but two really loud and quite boisterous, thank you, Guy, pubs that in question, plus all the other shops that run alongside there that use it, for, like you say, bins and so on and so forth. So I do have some concerns as well, and I know a lot about supporting accommodation, and I'm really sorry because I'm not saying this to be disparaging to anybody, but they can sometimes be slightly challenging to manage, and I am a little bit concerned about the placement of them there. So I'm not so sure that this is like all singing and all dancing, because there is a lot of other issues to consider in that little small section where there are lots of other lots of flats. Actually, it's quite unusual for that area. There's the building across, like you've mentioned, but if you go just further along, if you go that way, you've got some other flats on the other corner. Go around the corner again, you've got more accommodation, more flats. So it's quite heavily built, even though it doesn't appear so, because of that unique situation there. So I just wanted to point out those factors. So I'm a bit concerned, really.
So, Lorraine, sorry, was there...
What's
so
my
like
question?
Yeah, well, what's the
Sorry.
question?
What was my question? The infrastructure isn't really necessarily fully been explained, I don't think, clear enough. So we need some more information about the overall infrastructure. Is that possible to obtain that? Is that a question? That's a question, isn't it? Yeah.
I can certainly cover, I think there's a sort of question around parking there, so I can certainly cover that. So in terms of the parking assessment, that included a consideration of not just parking on Church Road, because as you've made clear, there is very limited and in fact virtually no parking on Church Road itself. So the assessments largely included an assessment of areas within a 2 minute walking distance of the site, and then also the Chalks Road car park as well. So that's the main sort of parking area for the Church Road local centre. So it's included the streets around the site as part of that assessment, and then it's determined that adding those all together, there are sufficient car parking spaces available, does that make sense? So there were, I think it says in my report, at least 20 or 33 car parking spaces available at any one time as part of that survey. Yeah, so it included Derby Street car park, Derby Street on-road parking, so effectively all the car parking spaces along there, which are within a short walk, and then the nearby Chalks Road car park. And then it identified that there was a minimum of 33 spaces available within the studied area at any one time. And then the median availability was 58 spaces. So that demonstrates that there's more than enough car parking available, given that we're only losing 22 spaces for the car park.
I think as well there was the further question around sort of community infrastructure as well in there as well, which, Gary, you go for it.
Yes, I was going to add really, I think the officer advice on this is that it's a very good location for this type of accommodation. We have been involved with the housing team for quite some time about the delivery of this kind of accommodation across the city, and lots of locations have been looked at, because land is very scarce, and, some unsuitable locations have been identified, but also some much better ones, and I think this is definitely at the more positive end of that scale. We feel that this type of accommodation is more likely to succeed if it's located in or around town centres, such as this. You've got a really good range of facilities there. You've got good access to public transport as well. And also, I would point kind of across the road to the Z-Pod scheme as well, in the middle of the Chalks Road car park. That's been there for a while. A number of officers and members, I think, have visited that as well. I'm not aware of any significant problems with that. I think it's seen as generally a success story, and my advice is that I think this would be seen in a similar light, really.
Thank you. And then take a question from Katia, and then we'll move on.
I just wanted to ask, because I know that there's the livable neighbourhood scheme around that area, and I'm not quite sure where the boundaries of that, whether it goes that far up St George's, and whether that is also part of the parking schemes and things to try and get people to not use their cars in that area.
I mean, I can't confirm the exact boundaries, but yes, there's sort of consultation happening on the livable neighbourhoods. It is in that area. I can't confirm the exact boundaries or exactly what it will look like, but it is going on in the area. But there's no reason why it shouldn't be complementary with this.
Great, thank you. Right, well, I think that's brought the questions to a close, and we'll move on to the debate. I think for myself, in the current housing situation, whilst I think we'd all love to see bigger places for people, it definitely feels like this is a much more appropriate kind of setting for people who need temporary accommodation. I have a lot of residents that have temporary accommodation or are on the waiting list for temporary accommodation, and this feels like a much healthier place to live than the 13th floor of a tower block, which is where I have quite a lot of residents currently housed. So for that reason, I'll be supporting it. Would anybody else like to have something to say, Lorraine?
Yeah. The type of supported accommodation it is actually supported accommodation via the Salvation Army. It's not just a it wouldn't be, by the sounds of it, just a application with housing and then you can get allocated a space. It's going to be managed by the Salvation Army, and I'm just concerned a little bit about the density of the area and then plonking these 8 facilities in what I'm not actually, I don't care about the parking per se, because obviously I'm more concerned about active travel and livable neighbourhoods. That's what I meant actually. I'm more concerned about the appropriateness of the placement of it. That's kind of my main concern, and I don't want us to overlook the concerns coming from the nursery as well, just by not considering the impact that they think it might have on the children using that facility. I just think it's worth being aware of that. It's probably, I'm not going to suggest it, but it probably would have been an appropriate site visit to sort of see what it really looks like and to experience it. So I'm on the fence in regards to voting for it, even though I know that move on accommodation is necessary.
Yeah, I think I really hear what you're saying, and I think the Salvation Army element of it is quite a compelling element for me, because I know that there are lots of the types of vulnerable people who are going to end up here are currently ending up being housed in places where they don't have that support, and then that has escalating mental health issues. And so I feel more reassured about this particular scheme because of that added support that the residents would be having, and I feel like that would be a better situation than being on the 13th floor of a tower block without that additional support that Salvation Army could give them, or other agencies. Does anybody else have anything to say? Chris?
Yeah, we've got a very similar site in my ward, although much bigger. And to start with, I was a little bit concerned where it was, but after going through all the consultations, speaking with people, and like Gary, I think it's just brilliant now. I think we should have more and more sites like that. I brought up about the temporary stuff because I know how difficult it is working with homeless people. 2 years sometimes isn't enough time for them to turn their life around. So I am pleased, and that was raised with the Marshall Walk thing. So I think it's a fantastic idea. I know that area really well, having drank in the fire engine many times, and I will definitely be supporting this.
Andrew?
Yeah, I'll be supporting this too. I have reservations about the size, and we've had similar applications for sort of similar types of projects before, which again had reservations about the size. I think this is perhaps superior to others I've seen, and as far as being dual aspect. So I'm going to support this.
I'm going to move the officer recommendation if nobody has anything else to say. Would anybody like to second that? Oh. All right, we'll go for Guy because Guy's hand was quickest. So we'll take Guy as a seconder because you got one earlier, didn't you? You did, yep. We'll share it around. Okay, we'll do a roll call and we'll start from this side. We'll go for Chris first.
4.
Kasia?
4.
Guy?
4.
Lorraine?
Abstain. Can I abstain?
You can abstain. Chris?
4.
4. Leslie? 4. Andrew?
4.
And a 4 from me. Thank you very much. That passes. Great. With one abstention. Great. We are going to take a 5-minute so we will reconvene at 4 o'clock sharp. Thank you very much. Well, we can maybe get them to wait until we get to it, otherwise it starts getting muddy. Yeah. Okay, hello. Welcome back. Is everybody with us? That should be? Brilliant. Okay, so our next item on the agenda is Hobhouse Close, and we'll crack on with the public forum. So the first person we have is Councillor Steve Smith, please. You have 1 minute. I won't explain how the traffic lights work to you, because I think you know.
Thank you very much, Chair. Committee, the problem here is this building has never been the two-bed home that was approved. It was built and operates as a commercial premises. It is a permanent, full-time Airbnb for 10 people, and residents will tell you about the impact that that has. The report says that use is ending, but this was printed a couple of days ago. It shows it advertising up to at least next March for 10 people to stay. The report states that consent isn't required to operate an Airbnb. Now, I've shown in my statements and case law that suggests it may not quite be that simple, that for a full-time commercial operation like this, it is a different use class. It doesn't fall into C3 or C4. What we're asking for today is, if you're going to approve this application, as the recommendation is, that you consider attaching a condition, a requirement to it, that limits its use for short-term lets, so that whether it's 2 bedrooms or 5 bedrooms, wherever the windows and the pillars are, this building is returned to use as a domestic dwelling, which is what it was originally intended for and what was originally granted consent in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Martin Jones, please.
Most of us residents probably have no issue with the fact that it being a two-bed. The fact that it's gone on to become an Airbnb has caused a massive impact within our lives. Mr. Clegg is a clever bloke. He knows exactly what he's doing. He's a property developer. He's ignored the planning inspectorate's decision on appeal to go ahead and build what he wants for his own financial gain. It has a massive impact on us as a family. My daughter can't even sleep in her bedroom anymore because of the noise coming from the Airbnb constantly. She's in with us, adds plenty of stress to us. We cannot park with the addition of 5 to 10 vans, cars, whatever, parked in our small community at any one time. This goes on 7 days a week, and it's just gone beyond what it should have been, and we don't want it to accept it. That's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Les Rowe, please.
Many Hobhouse and Broadleys residents may wish to ask the company directors, Mr. and Mrs. Kelleggy, a few questions. For instance,
Can you speak into the mic, please? Can you try speaking into the mic? Because otherwise we can't hear you. Come, step forwards a little bit. Can you step forward, please? And into the mic.
shall I start again?
Start again, don't worry.
Yeah. Many Hobhouse and Broadleys residents may wish to ask the company directors, Mr. and Mrs. Kelleggy, a few questions. For instance, how would they both react and feel if a builder decided to convert a property very close to their own house into a multi-bedroom Airbnb? Would they be concerned by groups arriving in cars late into the night, unloading cases, shouting, slamming car doors and boots? Would they mind being disturbed and upset at the weekends by stag parties, drinking and singing outside in the garden until the early hours? Would they be frustrated when they couldn't park outside their own house and have to search for a place further away? Would they mind regularly picking up beer cans and other discarded rubbish outside? And importantly, would they feel unsettled and worried by the daily flow of strangers, particularly when their own young children were playing outside on the green? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Can we have Nick Duro, and also just as a note, can you speak in this direction, not at the applicant, because it's a stressful and tense enough situation as it is. Thank you.
There have been over 100 objections placed online, and yet the developer, one individual's unauthorised project, seems to trump all their concerns. The residents, many of whom have lived on this development for many years, are simply sidelined. But it's also important that we reflect on the moral issue regarding this case. The developer has built what he intended all along, with or without planning permission. Should he now be granted permission retrospectively to administer the property as a commercial business, an Airbnb, it would indicate, sadly, that sharp practice can prove to be financially rewarding.
Thank you. Paul Sullivan. And just another presentation note. Can you please try to speak into the mic as best as you can? Otherwise, we can't hear you.
Thank you. My wife and I are both totally blind. We rely on our neighbours keeping the area free of obstacles and not parking across the pavement. But we're not just the only disabled people in our area. There are lots of others, and their health and safety is important too. This property and the large number of here today, gone tomorrow visitors to this Airbnb that's sprung up in our midst endangers this. The developer has shown that he is totally unwilling or unable to keep the commitments he gives, and so I ask you to kindly reject this application.
Thank you very much. Okay, Sheila Miller, please.
The strength of feeling generated by this retrospective application cannot and should not be ignored. This property of 5 small, mainly self-contained units for short-term letting all year round has not actually been built as a dwelling, a place of residence, and should not be considered as such. The constant revolving door of strangers is harming the amenity of neighbouring properties, with issues of security, noise, disturbance, parking, litter, etc. The only way short-term letting will cease is to make it a condition of granting planning permission. We are not seeking punitive redress, but merely a return to the plans agreed on appeal. If we are to retain any confidence in the planning process, I respectfully request this application as it stands be rejected.
Thank you. Susan Holland, please.
Thank you. I'd like to start, please, by echoing what Councillor Smith has said, that this property is not and never has been a residential dwelling of any sort. It's never been used as a residence. It was built and is operated as an Airbnb designed for commercial use by 10 people. And that, in my respectful view, is a deliberate contravention of the planning permission which was granted. It continues to be advertised on Airbnb, and any assurance given to the planning officer that this use has ceased is simply incorrect. It's therefore incorrect to suggest that the use is irrelevant, and as the objections lodged amply demonstrate, in fact, it is the central issue here. You have significant evidence of the distress and inconvenience, the negative impact that this use has on the local community, and I would ask you please to impose stringent conditions to prevent that use from continuing.
Thank you very much. Okay, Maryam Hassan, please.
In response to the objections that we've received today, it was never our intention to let as an Airbnb. We let to an agent who actually knew and was aware that our property was a 5-bed HMO and we'd actually applied for a licence. When we approached him and discussed this fact, he told us that the agreement that we signed, or the contract that we signed, was serviced accommodation. And immediately we asked him if we could end this contract. However, he wanted a very large sum as compensation, and so we are in a bit of a situation because it's put us in a difficult position. We've therefore promised that as soon as the contract has ended, that we will of course not let on this basis, and it will be converted back to a, but obviously the majority of the objections are this, and that's where we stand.
Thank you very much. Joan and Brian Griffiths, please.
Even when the plans of the original building at 2930 Hobhouse Close appeared, concern was expressed by near residents. It soon became obvious that the original building plans were not being adhered to, and it was certain that the builder was not spending a lot of extra money without the confidence of knowing that his retrospective plans would be approved. Our real discontent began to grow when we realised that it was intended for multiple occupancy against all the accepted rules. Soon Airbnb overnighters appeared. They were often noisy late in the evening, took up residents' parking spaces and littered paths and gardens with beer cans and paper cartons. It should be obvious to understand why we are objecting to the current disturbing situation, especially as there are at least 2 nearby potential opportunities to open similar Airbnbs.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody here for this item who has submitted a statement but I haven't called up and would like to speak? Did you submit a statement? What was your name, please? Roger Moses. Oh, sorry, did I not call you? Please come up.
Thank you, Chair. Planning Control originally approved on appeal the building of a 2-storey, 2-bedroom residential family house in keeping with the existing style of the estate. The developer then cynically built something not approved, a 3-storey, 5-bedroom.
Again, can you look at me and not at the applicant, please?
A 5-bedroom residential family house. So a 3-storey, 5-bedroom house in multiple occupation, not in keeping with the estate, for serial rental. He did not build to the approved plans and then modify the internal structure. He ignored what was permitted on appeal and deliberately built something else from scratch. If this is approved, Bristol City Council will be, in effect, tearing up its own planning rules, as well as ignoring the valid objections of the neighbours. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll just move to the officer presentation now, please. And you've all got the slides on your laptops. Thank you very much.
Thank you. This application relates to a retention of. It is the subject of enforcement investigation. Here is an aerial shot with the property located with the red star and a site location plan to the right. We have also here a 3D Google Earth shot, property circled in red. These are the approved plans that were approved on appeal, minus the roof design, which was to be subject to a pre-commencement condition. This was not discharged and is part of this application. Here are some photographs of the front elevation of the property within the context of the surrounding area, which were taken earlier this year. Some of the deviations to be noted from the approved plans are the design of the bay window white band above the bay and the pillars here which were not installed as part of the approved plans. These are the proposed elevations for this application. As part of this application, we have secured agreed alterations to the design of the bay window and the installation of pillars. And these are the existing floor plans of the property as built, which would not be altered as part of the application. It is noted there are 3 additional bedrooms, and we'll come back onto this point shortly. Is a more complete list of the deviations from the approved plans, namely that the bay window and the pillars are to be altered as part of any approval of this application. We have received 94 objections from 42 individuals covering these main points, namely the Airbnb use, potential HMO use, the additional bedrooms, parking, and the deviations to the approved plans on the front elevations. The property is not located within a conservation area, and more importantly, it is not located within an area covered by an Article 4 direction. Therefore, it is permitted development to change from a C3 dwelling house to a C4 small HMO for 3 to 6 occupants. Additionally, Section 55 of the Town and Country Planning Act states that internal alterations to non-listed buildings do not require planning permission. On the use as an Airbnb, case law states that, in principle, the use of a residential property for short-term letting does not constitute a change of use. It is a matter of fact and degree based on several factors, including the number of occupants, the number of nights it is booked per year, and the use of the property in between bookings. We want to assure members that granting this application would not provide permission for the property to be used for short-term lettings outside what is generally considered allowable under Use Class C3. We intend to include an advice note on any approval stating this, and where the planning enforcement team is content that the property was continuing to be used for short-term letting at a level that constituted a material change of use, planning enforcement action could be pursued to ensure the use ceases. To summarise, the use of the property as a small HMO and the internal alterations do not require planning permission. The exterior deviations from the improved plans are unfortunate. However, the agreed alterations as part of this application are considered to be sufficient to overcome the harm. Therefore, we recommend approval subject to the specified conditions, including that the agreed alterations are implemented in a reasonable timescale. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we get started, I've just noted the sort of public forum comments from the applicant about a contract that they're tied into, but it's not referenced in any way in any of the public forum documents. Would you like to give me any thoughts and views on that, Gary?
Yeah, I mean, when I heard that for the first time just now, my initial thought was, well, for how long then? So that would be interesting to know. We don't know that. Also, there is also the thought, though, well, but does it matter? Because at the end of the day, there's an allegation of change of use of the premises. Obviously, that can continue to be investigated. As with any C3 house across the city and across most of the country, I think apart from London, London have special controls over Airbnbs, whereas outside of London there isn't that level of control, unfortunately, but there's a lot of discussion around that. But at the moment we've got to use the legislation that we've got to hand. There isn't an obvious change of use, but obviously that can be, we can receive evidence from local people and assess that as to whether that then does trip the change of use requirement. So in answer to your question, I think it would be interesting to know how long that contract is, but almost we can't give undue weight to that because that's outside of our control, really.
It is. it's making me wonder whether or not we need to defer this until we have some more information, because if we're being told that they don't want to run it as a 5-bedroom but would do it as a 2-bedroom once this lease comes to an end, then do we need to be considering giving it a HMO license, because they're telling us that they wouldn't want to run it as a HMO, so then we're providing a HMO when we don't necessarily need to, and there's a lot of opposition to that.
So just to be really clear, there's two things that we can't control under planning. One is the internal layout that's been built out, because Sam's shown the Section 55 internal alterations aren't subject to planning control. So at the end of the day, what was granted on appeal, yes, there was talk of reference to 2 bedrooms, but any of us could subdivide our rooms and create more bedrooms if we wanted to without the need for planning permission. So that's the internal alterations we can't control. The thing then is for consideration in theory is a change of use from C3 house to C4 small HMO, which in particular parts of the city does require a planning application, because government created the C4 use class, small HMOs, but then immediately made it permitted development, which gives local planning authorities a long route through Article 4 directions to grab control over that. And so through the diagram that Sam's showing now, it's the blue. Is it the green area as well, or is it just the blue area? Ah, right. So forget the green area, that's conservation area, but it's the blue area, and many other parts of the city have those Article 4 directions. So if this property was within that blue area, that would need a planning application, as many HMOs do, and we know that. So the change of use to a small HMO doesn't require planning permission due to national permitted development rights, and because it's outside of the Article 4 direction. So what is kind of like lingering as part of this assessment is the alleged use, but you've heard a lot of evidence about that for short-term lets. And so our advice in summary is that permission should be granted, because the headline application you're getting here is to regularise the kind of the built form that's come forward, because it's different to the appeal permission. However, in the light of all the what you've heard from both sides actually about short-term lets, is that our recommendation is, well, you can add an advice note to say, reminder, this is a C3 house, not a use for excessive short-term lets. The kind of fallback position beyond that is something we're not 100% comfortable with, but would be a condition. There would be some questions as to how enforceable and necessary in planning law that would be, but nonetheless that is an option available to you. But I think as a committee, what isn't for consideration is the fact there's 5 bedrooms. What isn't for consideration that it's a small HMO that doesn't need planning permission, but what is for consideration is the allegation about short-term lets. Sorry, that's a long answer, but hopefully it was helpful.
So we can consider the short-term let element of it, although there's now the pending idea that that's a contract that's coming to an end at some point soon, but we don't know when.
That's correct, yes. And it's how the committee would like to control that. Either no further controls, an advice note, which is our kind of recommendation, or a step further, which is a condition.
Thank you. Does that make perfect sense to everybody? Lorraine?
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to just seek a point of clarification before I ask my question. So number 29, is the one that's the Airbnb, and we're saying that the same owners want to build an extension adjacent to that, or is it the same property to change of use? Sorry, just clarification.
Sorry, I understand that's slightly confusing. The original application, the plans on the screen now, were referred to as 29 Hobhouse Close, to build a new dwelling to the side of it in land that was under ownership of number 29. Because this application is tied to this previous application from 2018, it has come through again as 29 Hobhouse Close. The property in question is number 30.
Right, so it would be two properties held by the same. Am I being thick? Sorry, that's why I was seeking clarification before I asked my question.
No, sorry, we're only talking about the property outlined here with the red line to the side, which is number 30. I understand it is confusing, but this red line defines the area of the planning application, which is number 30. It is down as number 29 because of the 2018 application and its ties to that application.
Yeah, so number 29 don't really have anything to do with it other than being next door.
Yes, and the property was built on land that was on ownership of 29.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it's now. No, now isn't, and it is now number 30.
Yes.
Yes. So
somebody's beeping.
So basically, there was a patch of land next door to number 29.
Yeah.
It was part of their garden. They've sold that off, presumably. I assume that's what's happened. And then a planning application has been made to build something on that patch of land at the end of the terrace. The application was for one particular design. That's not what's been built.
Right.
That is now known as number 30. But because it was a patch of land that was attached to number 29, that's why this has come up as 29, but it's actually number 30. Does that make sense?
So number 29, then, Chair, is the Airbnb.
No, number 30 is the Airbnb.
Number 30, sorry,
yes.
is the currently running as an Airbnb.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
I do see all the hands over there, but I'm afraid
Sorry.
we can't turn it into
That's
a round
all right.
conversation.
Yeah, okay. So potentially there would be an increase in that regard with the Airbnb if it's the same property.
Say that again.
So if there is an issue with there being an Airbnb already running.
Yeah, so what the planning application was for originally was for a 2-bedroom house on that patch of land.
Yeah.
A 5-bedroom house has been built and it's being operated as an Airbnb.
I'm with you.
Are you with me?
I'm with you. Sorry,
Good.
that was the bit that I was sort of like trying to understand. Sorry, I understand now.
Yeah.
So I'm a bit, so I'm concerned so my question is, so if there was so you said, sorry Gary, you said we can't dictate what goes on inside a building, so you can change it to 20. Could you split it? And could it be more than 5 rooms? Could a property, I'm just saying that based on that premise, could it increase if they made tiny little rooms and it went up to 10? So is that possible?
So, because planning permission was granted by the planning inspectorate for a house here, and that's a house has been built, but different to what the permission that was granted, and that's why you've got the application before you. It's to cover off those differences. As part of those differences, it's been subdivided so that 5 people can live there as a small HMO. A small HMO can go up to 6 people. So say if 6 people were living there, but not as the same household, that wouldn't need planning permission here. So that's what could happen. But if it went beyond that to 7, 8, 9, 10, that'd be a large HMO, and that would require planning permission. So you're being asked to regularise the situation by confirming approval of a single dwelling house. But the nub of the issue here is the evidence from both parties actually that the property is used for short-term lets. Now, it's a grey area as to whether that is a change of use away from a house. So our advice to you is to grant permission for this application, but what's open to you, I think, is what control you want to put on in terms of short-term lets. Is it an advice note, which is our recommendation, or you could go one step further and put a condition on controlling or seeking to control that.
Sorry, Chair. So there's a follow-up question. So we could put controls on, and what could we say? Like, what options do we have as far as we are going to control this property? Thank you, Chair.
we have here a example draft condition which could read: the property hereby approved shall not be used solely for short-term letting, defined as lettings for less than 14 continuous days. The reason: this would constitute a material change of use and requires consideration to protect the amenity of neighbouring properties. Would you like me to read all of it, or just...
And is it possible that you could have it projected on the screen as well for accessibility reasons?
It's not in my presentation anywhere.
Okay, but maybe when we get closer to that point, if we could have it on the screen, it would be quite helpful, I think.
Sure, I can look into that.
Yeah, read out again now, would be great.
Okay. The property hereby approved shall not be used solely for short-term letting, defined as lettings for less than 14 continuous days. Reason: this would constitute a material change of use and requires consideration to protect the amenity of neighbouring properties.
Thanks. There's also a question I feel around, so like the small HMO and how it could be a small HMO up to 6 people. This is 5 bedrooms and they're 5 double bedrooms, and there is a quantity of evidence around both parts of that bed being occupied, so that they are being doubly occupied, each of those 5 bedrooms, thus making it a 10-person HMO, short or not, in terms of the let. So what are our powers around it's 5 bedrooms if they're both double occupied?
So the property does have a HMO licence for 5 occupants at the moment, which is administered by the private sector housing team. If we had evidence that it was exceeding 6, it would become a sui generis large HMO, in which case enforcement action could be pursued. But it's up to 6 is the C4. Above that is sui generis and is a separate use class.
And what evidence would be being looked for in terms of there being more than 6 people occupying at any one time? How would we quantify that?
The evidence we would generally look for, provided by the property owner, would be tenancy agreements, as these would state how many people are in the property and for when the tenancy starts and ends.
Thank you. Other people have some questions whilst I... okay, so I'm going to go for... catch you if it's a question. Otherwise, Guy, then Andrew, then Chris.
So let me get this to understand it. To become an HMO for 5 bedrooms, you're allowed to divide. In my house is a 3-bedroom house. I could divide one of my bedrooms into 2 bedrooms. Now, obviously, it's just my family that lives there. But then I could suddenly decide, I actually want to turn my house into an HMO, move into the countryside. And you can use my tiny little room, because I'm looking at the measurements of these rooms, they're tiny. And I could suddenly say, as long as there's not more than 5 people on tenancy agreements, because usually there's just one person on the tenancy agreement, it's okay to keep it as an HMO. It doesn't sound right. Because that's really like, you could put people in cupboards then. You could turn it, it doesn't sound right. It just doesn't. If I was dividing my own house, because say my 2 children need to share a bedroom and they fight with each other, and so I put a dividing wall in so they stop fighting. That's something, because it's my 2 children. But if I'm now letting those 2 rooms out to 2 different people, there should be some sort of rule about that. And they've made the bathroom, they've obviously taken one of the reception rooms and turned it into a bedroom. Don't know.
So there are rules, there's kind of 2 sets of rules around that about HMOs. So if you live in an Article 4 area and you wanted to convert to a HMO, then you need planning permission. If you're outside of an Article 4 area, like this location, then you don't need planning permission. However, you also need a licence from the housing service as well, under the Housing Act. And it's that licence, which isn't controlled by the planning committee, it's controlled by our housing team under different legislation. They look at the kind of the quality and level of provision. So you have to meet both sets of legislation, but as a committee, you're only dealing with one set of legislation.
Thanks. I'm going to jump in again, actually. So, Councillor Smith has very helpfully submitted some screenshots of the Airbnb listing, which says 5 bedrooms, 10 guests. That clearly indicates 10 people staying there, and that's what they're advertising it for, and that is not a small HMO.
And so to pursue enforcement action, we need evidence of that actually taking place. So, you know, obviously we're receptive to complaints from local people, and also that may then trigger us requiring information from the property owners about the usage of the property. Again, it's sort of, there's that area then between what's the short-term let that's not a change use between a small HMO. So we'd need some investigation. Obviously, we're prepared to investigate it, and we need evidence to go on, really.
More so than the actual applicant's own listing online.
That's right, because it's one thing to aspire to do something or to have the allegation. What you need is the actual evidence that it's taking place, because ultimately, if we serve the notice and we're either up in front of magistrates or in front of a planning inspector and enforce a notice of appeal, we've got to be able to demonstrate that something has happened.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, Guy, then Andrew, then Chris.
Thank you, Chair. For those colleagues who've become frustrated with me going on and on about HMOs and licensing and planning over the last year, welcome to the House of Fun. Right. Sorry, I'm trying to get my head around this across multiple documents. So apologies if this darts here and there and everywhere. Chair, I absolutely share your concern that this seems to be a property that's being at least advertised as being leased to 10 people, which makes it a large HMO. It's been granted a licence as a small HMO. Is that part of the private housing? Okay. Can I ask by whom and so to whom and when? As in, when was that licence applied for, and who was it given to? Is that I've just tried to find it on SharePoint, can't find it. I was wondering if you knew.
We can look into that. I think the thing that is, it's not really material to the planning decision, but it's a background information, is the fact that there is a HMO licence there. What the application before you, I must stress, you're assessing the application before you, which is to consider a C3 house that's different to the one that already has permission. That's the thing before you. If there's an allegation that it's a large HMO, that can be looked into. That'll be a related but a separate matter. The other thing that you've heard a lot about is the allegation of a short-term let use. And as we've said, really, you've got two options in terms of how you want to exert control over that. One is an advice note, the other one's a condition. And so that they're the, kind of the practical choices we're offering up, really.
When did the HMO licence get granted? Do you know?
Yeah, again, we can find that out. I think the thing of most interest is that it does exist, that there is a HMO licence. So it, prompts the thing, well, there's a HMO there, and as long as it's a small one, it doesn't need permission. If the allegation is that it isn't a small one, it's a large one, it's more than 6 people living there regularly not as a single household, then obviously that can be investigated.
Thank you. Carry on, Guy.
I raise it, thank you, Chair. I raise it solely on the basis that the applicant raised it minutes ago in here when they said, well, we accidentally let it as an HMO through a third party. Well, I'm wondering then who applied for the licence for it to run as an HMO, because if it's an accident, why not simply hold back? But I digress, because I appreciate what Gary's saying. That is what's in front of us today. And I'm sure it will strike members of the public as utterly bizarre that a property that's been given permission for 2 people can then extend to 5 bedrooms and then let to 10 people without seeming to need a planning consent to do so. I've also got a lot of questions around fit and proper person test that was supposed to be part of the HMO licensing regime. In terms of enforcement, because obviously one of the things that would be an appropriate thing for this committee to consider would be the effect on residential amenity, because we have all sorts of policies in place to protect residential amenity. And if we're seeing the level of upset and public nuisance that's being caused by what is on paper a 2-bedroom home, I'm wondering at what point the two regimes do talk to each other. The HMO licensing scheme and the planning scheme. Because it strikes me that there should be a rep here from the private housing team to speak to the appropriateness of the application, and there isn't. And at the same time, I'm wondering how they granted an HMO license without planning getting involved and saying there's no planning permission for such a thing for the following reasons. And I appreciate the idea that the two legislative regimes are separate in the same way that licensing and planning are two separate regimes, but nonetheless, planning is a statutory consultee for licensing applications, and licensing can be a statutory consultee for planning applications. I'm just wondering at what point evidence that's prurient to both regimes is shared between council departments.
So in answer to that, certainly information is shared between departments. We've got a list of properties that have HMO licences, and we're working through that, but prioritising the complaint schemes that members of the committee will be aware of, so that the teams do talk to each other and share information. But as Councillor Portney has said, we're operating to different legislation. Another example is like planning and building control. You know, you can't put the two together, no matter how desirable that might appear. And what I do know is that, you know, when we were working on this whole thing with our private rented team years ago, when the new licensing, HMO licensing, was rolled out in parts of the city and then expanded, certainly I know that the housing team made representations to government about, when we're operating our scheme, can one of our requirements be that the scheme has planning permission? And government said, no, you have to operate the two systems independently. And so that's, you know, that's a bit unsatisfactory, but that's what we have to do, unfortunately.
Thank you. Okay, Andrew, then Lorraine, because I think I missed your hand earlier, then Chris.
Thank you. I've got 3 questions. The only one's on this HMO issue, and I don't want to keep flogging a dead horse, but are we to take it that letting a property on a short-term let basis isn't a breach of the HMO licence?
Not aware of that, but that's a question we will ask that team immediately, because it's an issue for them, but it's something they need to be aware of. So yes.
Thank you. Coming on to the planning permissions. So this was refused. We refused it because we said it wasn't in character, etc., etc. It got allowed on appeal. Are we saying that the proposal with the conditions attached, once those conditions have been exercised, that it is in a state that would be given planning permission?
That's correct. Yes, we think, you know, on balance, some of the differences in the building, as Sam showed with the photographs, you know, that whilst they're regrettable, on balance, we don't think we could uphold a reason for refusal on those relatively minor changes to the external appearance of the building. But in order to try and bring it back to a more acceptable level, we're proposing conditions that require modifications within a period of time. So with all that in mind, our recommendation is to grant permission for the dwelling as amended.
And that takes into account the fact that there's now an additional window in the rear, you know, in the rear, that allows light into the attic space, that, you know, all down the rest of the block is presumably just attic space.
Yeah, so installation of roof lights. It was a roof light you were asking about, was it, in the attic space?
Yeah,
yeah, installation of roof lights don't require planning permission as long as they don't project more than 15 centimetres from the external roof slope.
Okay, thank you. And my final question is, if we vote to adopt the proposed condition prohibiting short-term lets, at what point does that become effective?
So, I mean, so the conditions on the fringes of what we think is appropriate in terms of planning control, but what it would, it's a really clear reminder to the property owner, the applicant, that the property shan't be used solely for short-term letting. And what it does in terms of enforcement, rather than serve an enforcement notice that then can get appealed, it would be a breach of condition notice that there's no conventional right of appeal. You just go straight to magistrate's court. There, though, there would be a bright light shone on it and say, well, how enforceable is this? But so that's why we're not wholeheartedly saying, oh, a condition will resolve this to everyone's satisfaction. But it is something technically you can put on, and I think, you know, might be worth doing.
But in terms of mechanics, if we resolve it today and the decision notice is issued, I don't know the precise mechanics of it, but presumably then a decision notice is issued, is it then effective from that point?
Yes, I believe it is, because it's the regularisation of a property that's there already. So I believe so. So if we unfortunately we can't, given the resourcing of the service, we can't proactively stand outside the property and monitor what's happening. But obviously, lots of interested local residents, for understandable reasons, if we were provided with evidence about it being used for 14 continuous days, then we would then do our own investigations prompted by that, and then. Yeah, so I think it's effective immediate from the grant of permission.
Lorraine? No, okay, Chris?
Yeah, thanks for some of them explanations, although they seem to contradict each other. But what firstly amazes me is that I could put in an application for planning, it comes to a committee for a 2-bed house, and then just turn round and go and build a 5-bed with rooms that aren't suitable for people to live in, which is just absolutely amazes me. Because if we send out a notice to people, and we'll put application for a nice 2-bed house with great big bedrooms, and then I'm going to cut them all up and put that, absolutely amazes me, because for all my years of sat on planning and all the training, nobody's ever mentioned to me, ever.
I think there's something in the training slides about things that we can't control, and maybe when we run it again in the new year, we emphasise maybe this as an example where planning doesn't deal with internal changes, but it does deal with material changes of use. But some material changes of use from C3 to C4 small HMO, unless covered by an Article 4 direction, don't actually require planning permission. So there is quite a lot that all of us could do that doesn't actually require planning permission.
Right, so I'll go on to my question. Whatever that chap put up on the screen, the writing just now, about the conditions, I'm very happy with what was up there. But like Andrew said, how enforceable is that going to be? Because if I can't change your recommendation, then I'll be voting against it. So I just want to know that form of words that was put up on the screen, which is gone now. How enforceable is that?
Well, I think to start with, I think we're all limited by the legislation that we're given to apply, and I know the whole short-term let Airbnb creates issues all over the country and has already in different parts of the city, and we aren't given the legal tools to do that, or not. We can't even put an Article 4 direction to stop that from happening. So that's a frustration to everyone involved. But in the light of that, a condition in these circumstances, we think the condition as set out there gives us the best opportunity available to exert some control over it. But it's far from a guarantee because of the lack of clarity between when a change of use happens from a house to a short-term let, and that's just just due to the limitation of the legislation we've got to apply, unfortunately.
Because the reason I ask is, the next time a house comes here, which is 2 or 3 bedrooms, I want that put on every single planning application. If people can just do what they like whenever they want, and we've got no comeback on it. So I would be I wouldn't look at a 2 or 3 bed house or a 4 bed house ever again as just a property. I would be looking at changing all the recommendations and put it on that we'll have to put on, because we've got no choice if it comes back to us. That's absolutely, I'm amazed.
Would you like to respond to Gary?
Only, I think we're saying it in this case in response to what we've heard from Public Forum and through the consultation on the application. I wouldn't recommend applying it to every housing proposal going forward, but that's for members to decide.
Thinking about the wording of that, and it says it shall not be used solely for short-term letting. How open to interpretation is that? So could somebody, for example, because there's peaks, there's like in the year that would be more lucrative, could the landlords rent it for 6 months, which to a tenant, and then for the summer period, for example, rent it out as Airbnb? Well, I mean, it solely is open to interpretation, isn't it? So if in a 1 year period, if you had 6 months of the same tenants and then 6 months of other changing nightly tenants, that's not solely short-term lets, is it? That's part of the year, it's a long-term, because 6 months counts as long-term, doesn't it? Even though it's not by most people's interpretations.
Unfortunately, the answer, I just don't know, Chair, to be honest. We're thinking on our feet here in terms of the effectiveness of that control. I think we came here today seeing the Public Forum statement thinking, right, I think we can clearly recommend, hand on heart, the advice note. The condition is a bit more of a stretch, to be honest with you. So in the light of that, I can't give you any more reassurance than we already have.
No, thank you. I mean, I think we all appreciate how tricky it is as a situation.
Could you change them words to get rid of solely and just put shall not be used for short-term letting? Just do that.
We've got to be careful. This is where I think we honestly probably need more time to think about the wording of such. I think if the will of the committee is that a condition is required to make the scheme acceptable, I think we've put that wording together quite quickly. You've asked, a lot of very relevant searching questions about the enforceability of it. I think we would need more time to think about what a more effective condition would look like, because what no planning committee can do is exert a control beyond what is permissible anyway. So some use of any property for short-term letting doesn't require planning permission. So we can't, go that far to say it shall never be used in that way. So, I think if the condition is important to the committee and you've got doubts about how it's worded at the moment, I think we would welcome more time to think about that, take some advice from our own legal colleagues, actually.
So just for that, come back on that. So what would happen to this application At the moment, it just go away and then you will bring it back?
So at the moment, yeah, the application's undetermined, so that would remain the case. So we would bring it back to the next meeting of this committee with the recommendation amended with that additional condition, but with wording that we will have discussed with our legal colleagues that is robust, and we can advise you accordingly on that.
So that will be the next meeting, whether it's A or B. It will come back to the
It
B.
must come back to the same committee, so it would be the next meeting of B. So no, we wouldn't move it to.
So
A.
we ain't got to worry about this coming back in 6 months' time. It will come back quite quickly.
I think the point is so specific about the wording of that condition that we would come back to the next meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Guy?
Just quickly on that, Chair, could one of the officers confirm at what point the applicant could appeal for non-determination?
Well, it's over the determination date at the moment, so they could now, we would be asking them to agree an extension of time, but there would be no obligation for them to do so.
So, and as you know from the first item, what an appeal against non-determination does is it's the applicant accepting a deemed refusal from the council and going back, this time for the second time, to a planning inspector saying we want permission. And it'd be for a planning inspector to assess the merits of the scheme, you know, all the issues, including the short-term lets situation. So the determination deadline, as on the first page of this particular report, is 11th of July. And given the local interest, it's certainly not unusual for the consideration of an application like this to take so long. And given the member referral, you know, this is why we're here within this time period, really. So, yeah, technically the applicant could appeal against non-determination. That's a decision for them, really.
And then in terms of some of the question marks around the size of the HMO and whether or not it's 5 people or 10 people, if there was... can we be seeking extra evidence for that between now and the next committee if it got deferred?
I don't think so, Chair, because that's a separate enforcement investigation. The question being asked of the committee with this application is the applicant saying, can I have permission for a house as designed like this? They're not asking for permission for a large HMO. If there's an allegation of a large HMO, that has to be a separate enforcement investigation.
Which would be, just for absolute clarity for the committee, would that be through the planning department or through the licensing department?
Primarily through planning, because the difference between large and small HMOs, but certainly we've noted the question about if a use of a property with short-term lettings a breach of the HMO licence. That'd be, again, just us sharing information with another service to see if it breaches their legislation.
Yeah, great, thank you very much. Okay, so I saw Lorraine's hand and then Leslie's hand and then Andrew's hand.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm just a little bit still, I'm not confused, but I am very, no, let's wait for the debate, sorry. Sorry, Chair.
Leslie? Did you have a question or was it a statement?
On page 211, you have got comments about the planning system. You've just said that you're not being given the tools, and it's certainly wishy-washy. What are you doing about it? Are you making representations to presumably government where these instructions came from? Because they seem to almost contradict themselves.
Yeah, that, you know, in terms of legislation and government guidance, that may well be the case. It's not really for me to comment on, really, but I know the growth of regen scrutiny consideration of enforcement back in September looked at a lot of this, and I think it's been led by DCA, but certainly DCB had been invited into that process, and I think Councillor Andrew Varney is leading on the response that there is an action to write to government about enforcement controls. So that's something that I think if members are interested in being engaged with, to contact Councillor Varney.
Thank you. Lorraine, did you have something? No, you're good. Okay, Andrew.
Can I ask for a walkthrough of what happens next should we refuse this application?
If the application is refused, there will inevitably be an appeal because the property is built as it is. So the applicant will appeal, I am sure. With appeals, typically the council loses control of the case. Then it can make representations, but it's no longer making the decision whether the condition that we've been talking about for a bit would be added by a planning inspector is something to think about, really. So I think a refusal would trigger an appeal, and obviously we would submit what evidence we could to that. It'd be quite hard to, we can't oppose the in-principle development of a house there. That's already been conceded, and the physical changes are very minor. It'll all hinge on is the short-term let use something that is of concern to the planning inspector as well as the local planning authority. So, yeah, it'd definitely be an appeal.
Go on, Guy, and then we'll move on to the debate.
Final question, this is really out on a limb, but I'm just thinking of something that happened earlier in terms of the what were not Section 106 obligations, but what were done through an MOU, because obviously the council can't hold itself to account. Does that make sense? So from one of the earlier cases we were looking at that concerned a council development, so the council can't create an obligation on itself through a Section 106, so we have an MOU to ensure that the council... I'm just wondering if anything like that, given that enforcement is discretionary, has ever been tried around enforcement. In other words, could we bind the council to enforce where complaints and evidence suggested it was warranted as a planning committee?
I don't think we can't. We've got a local enforcement plan that's referenced in the report, and we have a duty to investigate, but we don't have a duty to then take action. But obviously we have to weigh up whether it's in the public interest to take action, so we couldn't bind ourselves in that way.
Good, great. Let's move on to comments and debate, as I know you all have lots. Chris's hand was first, and then it was Andrew, and then the other Chris.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think we need to go on personally. I'd just like to propose that this is brought back to the next DCB meeting after a form of words by the planning and the legal team has been brought together.
Thanks. Well, we've got a couple of routes forward. Either you can propose that we defer it, or I can, after maybe a couple of other people probably want to say something, but propose the officer recommendation, and then you don't have to vote for it.
Yeah, if that's the best way round, to defer it once a form of words have been by, you can put, however you can phrase that however you want.
Yeah, I think probably for the sake of any appeal for non-determination is going to come forward, testing the officer recommendation would be a good protocol for you?
Possibly, Chair, but unless I've misread the room, I don't think the current recommendation is going to fly.
Neither do I. Just wondering how about basis you want us to be about it.
I think what Councillor Jackson's put forward is really clear in terms of deferral. Send us away to work on the wording of the condition and bring it back. So
yeah,
that's really clear and precise for us.
Yeah, I'd like to move that. Somebody want to second it?
Do you want a seconder? Is that Lorraine seconding? Excellent. All those in favour of a deferment? Not yet. It's right. We don't need to pressurise them into it. So I'm voting for deferment as well. Okay, so against? Chris. Andrew, we're voting against the deferment currently. Would you like to... okay. Councillor Pulteney, stop distracting him. What's the question, Andrew?
My concern is the issue that Councillor Pulteney raised earlier, vis-a-vis being past the determination deadline, and whether deferral will potentially put us in make the situation worse, if it, or rather, the potential is that it will leave the council's control in the meantime. That's my concern.
I would say, certainly, in terms of protecting the council's interests, I think I would take a deferral over a refusal. I'm not sensing an approval unless I'm suddenly surprised by everybody. So any day I'd take a deferral over a refusal. And then it's up to the applicant whether they appeal non-determination, or, having thought about what they've heard today, whether they could live with the prospect, without predetermining the prospect of a permission, but with a condition looking something like that's on the screen now, but obviously would be properly published in the papers next time around.
Sorry, apologies. I wasn't opting between. My dilemma wasn't between deferral and refusal. It was between deferral and accepting with the condition.
Okay. So
anyway, we'd moved to a vote, and I seem to have interrupted that.
We've started a vote on deferral because it's quite clear that approval is going to fall, and that we had a seconder for deferral. If that fell, we could maybe test the officer recommendation again. But in this instance, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in favour of deferral, 1 against, and whatever you decide to do.
I will vote for deferral in this scenario then.
Okay, thank you. So that's 7 votes for deferral and 1 against. Thank you. So this will be deferred until the next committee, Guy, unless, I mean, it's too late now. Chris. Other Chris, that Chris. Chris Windows. Yes. Fabulous. Thank you. Is everybody clear as what happened? Pardon? Okay. Well, it's fine. Okay, so that brings this particular item to a close for the moment. We'll allow the room to clear out, shimmy the officers around. This item will come back to the next committee, which is in January? 18th of January, which will be a 6 o'clock in the evening meeting, I believe. So just for clarity as well, the statements and things that you've put in for today's committee, you will have to resubmit statements if you want to speak again at the next committee, just so that you're very clear on that. So for the next committee in January, if you want to come and speak again, submit new statements in the same way as you did for today. No, it's deferred pending some more information. Gary, do you want to?
We'll confirm the scheduling of this at the next agenda meeting of this committee, which is the chair and the party leads. On confirmation that this is coming back, we will write to everyone again to say this is coming to this meeting at this time, but it's 99% certain it'll be on the 18th of January at 6 o'clock. But we will write to everyone confirming, and that will invite you again to resubmit public forum statements in the way that you did today. So it's a for the whole application.
But basically, it's a rerun of what we did today. So what happens next is at the next committee, almost certainly the next committee, which is in January, we will do this all again, but with hopefully more information and some firmer wording for that condition. You're welcome. No, so we're already going a little bit beyond what the rounds we should do at this. So at this point, I need to ask you to leave the chamber so we can get on to our next item. And we will see you again in about 6 weeks' time. And have a very nice winter and Christmas. Thank you very much. Okay, can everybody come back to their seats, please, so we can get on? Chris is running the wrong direction. Guy, can you make Chris come back, please? Because he's gone in the wrong direction just now, on your way out. Yeah, tell Chris Jackson to come back. I know, they're not supposed to run out the room when we say we're about to start. Great. Okay, thank you very much. Great. So, it's Birchwood Road, and our first speaker is Councillor Tim Bippington, please. Oh, yeah, no, sorry, thank you. Yeah, we do need to do the petition, if you're still here. Do you want to come and do that first? So this is a petition that was submitted earlier, and we missed it off because Mr. Mahmood wasn't here.
So this is just a petition that's been signed by the local area. I've been running the shop for 12 years, and the customers basically demanded me that I open a takeaway because they haven't got much variety in the area. They've only got one Chinese takeaway that's been there for at least 20 years, and it's not modern. And obviously with my food, it's obviously going to be more authentic, and that's what they wanted. So that's the reason why I signed this petition. And within one day, I had 64 people sign it, and online another 64 as well. So about over 130 signatures in like 2 days. So,
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
I've got it electronically. Okay. All right, lovely. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay, and then we will move to the public forum statements for it, and Tim, it's your go.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I don't know why, but we seem to be going out of our way to find issues with this simple planning application. The guidance on schools surely doesn't apply here. How many 7 or 8 year olds have you ever seen gathering outside a curry house when they should be in school? Traffic in this neighbourhood is very quiet, and the takeaway is aimed at local people who have very little by way of other amenities. If anything, the provision of a local curry takeaway is going to cut the number of car journeys, as people currently have to travel well outside the area for this. Parking on St Anne's Road is not an issue, as half the road is devoid of housing, and the rest has off-road parking on it. I've been along here many times, and large sections of the road are deserted. As I've said in my statement, the applicant is committed to ensuring that all guidelines relating to noise and smell are met, and is willing to invest considerable sums to meet these requirements. His own family live on the premises, so there's no third party involved who might be directly affected by noise or smell. Rather than rejecting this application, I propose that we work with the applicant to ensure he delivers his proposed service in a compliant way, giving the best possible outcomes for the area. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Derek Robbins, please. No, Derek. Okay. Usman Mahmood, would you like to come up and say anything else, or you don't have to? But we've got you marked down as having made a statement as well. No. All right. Okay. Thank you very much. We'll move over to the officer presentation, please.
Thanks, Chair. So this application is for the proposed use of a new commercial unit as a hot food takeaway. And one of the ward councillors for East has referred the application to committee. Officers are unable to support the application for 3 reasons. 1, proximity to a school. 2, lack of information to meet local highway authority requirements. And 3, lack of information to meet pollution control requirements. The new unit has been built attached to an existing convenience store on the corner of St Anne's Park Road and Birchwood Road. This slide here shows the site in comparison with the siting of the school, the Kingfisher School, which is just to the north there. It's about 150 metres from the site. And this is the new unit here and the junction of Birchwood and St Anne's Park roads. The previous permission in your report included the creation of an off-street parking area at the rear of the site for use by the owners. This element is not yet implemented, but it would be still the intention to have an area of off-street parking at the rear for the owners' vehicles and for deliveries of goods. And currently it looks like this, so it's in the process of being converted to off-street parking. 3 neighbour representations have been received, comprising 2 objections on amenity and parking grounds and 1 letter of support. Comments from Highways are effectively in two parts. Firstly, requirements for upfront trip generation analysis and parking survey, both by suitably qualified persons, to evidence the parking demand and local capacity, whether there's local capacity to meet that demand. And secondly, measures to mitigate the highway safety risks, which could be via conditions or possibly a financial contribution to amend the existing traffic regulation order. Similarly, pollution control require upfront details of kitchen extract system and an acoustic report, also by a suitably qualified person. Although since writing the report, I think the extract has already been installed, I think in the last week or so. Currently looks like that on the side elevation. The takeaway would be open to customers between midday and 10:30 at night, 7 days a week, according to the application form. And it's policy DM10, food and drink uses, which is the main policy. It states that new takeaway uses are acceptable if amenity impacts are acceptable, with particular focus on noise, odour, parking, and the appearance of flues, etc., and if highway safety impacts are acceptable. And the second part of policy DM10 looks to resist new takeaways within 400 metres of a school on grounds of health impact. And so this site is 150 metres from the school. So in this case, officers have insufficient information to conclude that noise, odour and highway safety impacts would be acceptable, and the site is approximately 150 metres from a school, and therefore officers are recommending refusal. And that concludes the presentation.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions? Andrew.
I'm kind of wondering why this has come to committee now, given there seems to be so many unanswered questions. Is that been, has the applicant requested that it be determined now, or is there another reason?
Yeah, the highways comments and the pollution control comments have been online since March time, I think, of this year. And a site visit was done in April with the highways officer. But I think it's probably fair to say that the agent disagrees with us in terms of these upfront requirements. He doesn't agree that they're necessary. So there's a difference of opinion there between the applicant's representatives and officers around the requirement for a transport consultant to, provide industry standard trip generation information and a parking survey. So I don't think it was ever going to be, submitted to us because it wasn't felt on their side that it was necessary.
Chair, can I add as well, there's also reason refusal number 1 is an in principle objection as well, which obviously members can consider themselves, but it's a health impact one, which I know members have felt strongly about in the past. So whilst, the request for further information is there, I think there was a point in time where we had to bring it, given the ward member referral to you, because even if that information came forward in terms of highway safety and amenity impacts, at the end of the day, we'd still be left with, as officers, with that concern over the health impacts by virtue of policy DM10. So that's why it's before you now.
Chris?
Yeah, thanks. I'm surprised at that. Did you obviously speak to the agent and impress on him that this is needed?
Yeah, I think, he could read it online, and, I did explain that, highways needed to be satisfied that it was safe in principle before they could, agree to it. But he was adamant that it wasn't necessary to do these additional surveys.
Right, because I know that area quite well. I've got a friend that lives just not far from there. And I do agree with what the councillor said, that we could do, or that area could do with something else, a bit of variety, a bit of diversity. So that's why I'm surprised that we haven't managed to, as Andrew said, get those issues sorted before it came here, or is it just a flat refusal and that's it? I can't honestly see it being a health problem, an Indian restaurant by a children's centre, to be perfectly honest. But the other two issues, I can see why you just maybe need to get that box ticked before an application can come to us.
Could I just clarify, though, that you have to see it as a hot food takeaway, so it could be any type of hot food. So I can understand why an Indian cuisine may not be immediately appealing to primary school children, but it could change without any further push into pizzas, fried chicken, and so on. So you've got to, obviously it's up to members what view they take on that issue, but as long as you're taking into account, it could be any type of hot food takeaway there.
Into the mic.
Yeah, so in terms of the outstanding requirements, refusal reasons 2 and 3, it is just, an unavoidable fact that these sorts of things are very, they can't be done. They need to be done by qualified people, and, there's an expense to that, a considerable expense to that. So I just think, I don't know why there was such a resistance to get these reports done. Perhaps it was costs, but I do think it was just a difference in opinion. I don't think the applicant and his representative thought they were necessary, and therefore they weren't willing to sort of, get the reports done.
But you did impress on them that it was, if you didn't have it, then you wouldn't get planning permission. You did make that perfectly clear.
I mean that's what it states in the responses that are online. So I don't think I could have done much more, really. Yeah.
Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah. So, I was looking at the pictures in the report. So it appears that there's now a fascia on the building, as well as the installation of it, or partial installation of extractor fan equipment. I mean, what more do we know about the extent to which this has now been kitted out as a fast food place ahead of permissions?
Yeah, I think it's pretty much kitted out, ready to go. So there's an element of retrospectiveness to this now, but yeah.
Thank you. Lorraine, you have a question.
Okay, so under any circumstances, if, when somebody does something and then comes to decisions, we would take it quite seriously, wouldn't we, on all situations? So I guess my question is, what would the applicant need to do to turn this around, to make the building more appealing? Because it looks really quite not very appealing at the moment. What would he have to go away and do? Because, you know, like I get the point about the takeaway. That's really important. That it can convert to any, you know, classification once it's given permission to be a takeaway. So it could go from being something quite nice to something quite negative. So I get that. So what would this applicant need to do to go away, to sort this out, to stop it, you know, to stop being a takeaway at the moment because he hasn't got permission, so that he can come back with a robust plan if he wants to proceed? Thank you.
Yeah, so it would be three things really. It would be engaging the services of a transport consultant to one, submit some data on how many vehicular trips are likely to how many vehicular movements are going to be associated with this use, how many people are going to drive there to pick up food, and therefore can the curbside areas accommodate that level of parking demand. So it's one, trip data, and two, a parking survey. And then the third thing is an acoustic consultant needs to provide a report on the noise associated with this equipment that we see. So there's three things there. But again, like Gary mentioned, that this first refusal reason around health is an in principle objection. Nothing can be done about the proximity to the school, so you know that would remain unresolved regardless of any new information.
Can I just have one more follow-up question, please, Chair? Thank you. And the extractor fan thing, is that in the right? Is that legal? And who monitors that it's okay? If you see what I mean, because it's on the side. It's this side, isn't it? I can't see. Yeah, it's this side, the street side of the building. And that's that. Do you need approval for that? Does it have to be a certain standard, or?
Yeah, that would need permission in its own right if they were to install that, you know, later on. So you know, it is development. It's materially changing the appearance of the building. I mean, you'll notice that originally they were proposing a flue sort of vertically sticking out the roof, but they've decided this is a more suitable arrangement. So, yeah, from an appearance perspective, it's certainly not ideal, but from an amenity perspective, it might well be, in terms of noise and odour, it could well be the best option, and the appearance is the trade-off.
Could we, if the committee does go with the officer recommendation on this, can we send the applicant a really clear bullet-pointed document about the things that he needs to do in order to improve this application, should he bring it back again, in order to get it to be passed? The change that needed to be made in the reports that he needs to have, but sort of directly to him rather than sort of pulling it on the portal. Can we communicate with him directly?
Yeah,
and clearly.
Certainly, yeah. No, I think, you know, I've had phone conversations with him, and I've met him on site in person, and yeah, it's he's made it in no uncertain terms that this isn't something that he'd be, you know, would be willing to do. Having said that, you know, I can try again, and communicate.
Thank you. And obviously the applicant is here, so he's hearing this conversation.
Yeah.
So hopefully it's all very clear as advice. Chris?
Yeah, just two quick ones. So the parking, the pollution, the travel, that's done for every takeaway?
I'm not sure about everyone, but in the specific constraints of this site, you know, it's on a bus route. It's on a sort of busy.
So the answer is no.
I'm not sure. Yeah.
I mean, I think I would say it's sort of horses for courses. So on a very, very simple scheme, we wouldn't necessarily look at all of that. I think here, because it's slightly more complex, we want some evidence. But I mean, evidence can come in different ways. So essentially, we want to know how many people are going to use the site and is there some parking. There are different ways that we could be convinced, but at the moment we've got no evidence. So essentially, what the test we're trying to meet is the parking impact or the safety going to be? Is it going to be severe? Is the highway impact going to be severe? And we need some evidence to be able to advise you.
I just want to know if you ask them questions.
So we do, but on different scales. So this is in the middle. It's not one of the simplest, but obviously it's not a massive, drive-through. So it's an in-between one.
Okay, look, and just a quick one, a follow-up from the chair. If the applicant does put changes in us, if we refuse and he does go away and put changes, he is allowed to resubmit.
That's right, yeah. I think as long as the application's made by, within the 12 months of the date of submission, then it's a free go. But that will have been end of January, I think, given the, the start of the year. So the applicant would need to act quickly to get a free go. But equally, another application could be made, but hopefully with the requested information.
Fabulous, thank you very much. Lorraine?
Sorry, thank you, Chair. Just one more question. Could we, because we're talking about small business, is there any advice we could also add to this? I know I'm going off piste here, but about small business, is there any small business advice, help that he could be supplied with as well? Because we're talking about a small business, I guess. So I'm just saying that you don't have to even answer. Just a comment, really.
Yeah, I mean, there's a small economic development team that can provide or signpost advice for small businesses, but I know it doesn't stretch to advice across the board in terms of how to submit planning applications. That general advice and access to that is out there. Okay. And the applicant is using an established agent who has submitted hundreds of planning applications into the council. So that's the starting point. It's just, unfortunately, the agent's dug his heels in terms of what he feels he needs to submit to make the application acceptable. But we've had to maintain a line here, which I understand, which is that, well, until that information comes in, we can't properly support the application.
In the mic, or we can't hear you. Okay, let's move on to the debate, if that's okay. Unless, did you have another question? Right, let's move to the debate. Has anybody got any particular things that they would like to say? Go on then.
Yeah, I find this frustrating because, had we had those, satisfactory traffic management, the other things that have been identified, I would have been inclined to vote for this. Regardless of the proximity to a primary school, but I just feel that we don't have the information we need to make the decision. So I'll be inclined to vote to refuse.
Yeah, I think as well, what I'm hearing from the committee is that there's a lot of enthusiasm to support you going forwards, but you do need to work with the planning department in order to satisfy all of those elements of the application in order to make a good application that we can pass, and that's fair for all applicants, if frustrating. Lorraine, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with what you said, and Councillor Brown. In regards to, I think we're quite, really keen to do the right thing, and I think we can't start allowing unfinished applications to just go through because we're sympathetic. So, if the work is done, I will be more inclined to vote for it in the future. But at this time, I think there's insufficient information to warrant me voting for.
Okay, I'm going to move us to a vote to follow the officer recommendation to refuse. Who would like to second it?
I second that.
Ooh.
Sorry.
Oh no, you go.
Who hasn't seconded something today?
Well, I don't think either of us.
I can.
Lorraine, okay. All right, so Lorraine can second that. All those in favour of the officer recommendation to refuse? So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Chris, is that your hand going up or not?
sure, actually.
You're not sure?
In a position to make a decision, so I'm going to defer.
Abstain. Do you mean abstain?
Sorry, I was getting mixed up with the two.
Okay, so the officer recommendation for this one is to refuse the application, which is what we're currently voting on. Our colleagues have voted, 6 of us, to vote to refuse this application. Would you like to vote against refusing it or to abstain from refusing it? You're going to abstain? Okay, very wise. Thank you very much. That closes this committee. Thank you very much for attending. It's January the 18th at 6 o'clock for our next exciting show. Thank you very much.